Hey guys. This is part 4 of What If Naruto Was Banished to Unknown Lands. Hit like and subscribe if you like this one, and also please check the author in the description. Let's start.
We are pain, that's all. We are God.
Chapter 18, The Burning Sands, Tengaku. Hey Naruto! Nagi shouted across the hall. How many bottles of water to pack? He eyed his duffel bag and contemplated shoving another few bottles in the lumpy-looking pack. 10 more maybe. What? Naruto shouted back from his room. Just the one canteen should be enough? What? Senji shouted across from his room, poking his head outside. The boys had all chosen rooms on the same floor, same corridor. Guys, just bring enough to not slow you down. Honestly, haven't either of you been to the desert before? I crossed that same desert more than a year ago. Naruto chimed back in, adjusting the jacket on his white ninja suit. Despite the heat they expected, Jiraiya had told them to dress properly. The heat wouldn't kill you, but the sand might, and the nights were bitter cold. Naruto chose to wear a lighter material shirt all the same. The jacket would come off easily enough if he got too hot. Yeah, well, not all of us have an auto-regenerating body, Senji said as he shuffled into the hallway. He too had his jacket slung over his shoulder. Jiraiya came up the stairs and looked at them with a wry grin. I wish I could come with you. It sounds like a lot of fun. But Mabry and I need to head down to one of our suppliers. He nodded his head at the map of the world that was framed in the hallway. You know which wind stream will take you there? Naruto nodded, stepping out into the hall. I've got a stream that will take us to within a mile of Suna. Then we'll need to walk. Naruto frowned. I really wish there was an easier way to come back. It would take a month just to come back home from there. Jiraiya shrugged. We know there are streams that come back, we just don't know where they originate. Or how to find them at all. You finding the entrance stream was pure luck in the first place. Livingston. He found the stream. Naruto sighed. Maybe we'll get lucky and find one. Let's go, guys, Nagi declared as he stepped out of his room, 2 duffel bags oddly shaped because of all the bottles of water in them strapped to his back. Naruto and Senji laughed only to earn them a dark scowl from Nagi. The 3 friends walked out, meeting up with 2 members of the Spirit Wolf clan and heading for the Wind River that would take them to Suna. Border of Wind Country. The girls saw the contingent of Sand Ninja from Sunagekyo waiting by the edge of the trail. The grassy plain they were on was getting more sparse with every mile they put behind them. Sakura saw what looked like a shimmering lake in the distance, but she knew it was just an illusion caused by an endless sea of sand. The Sand Nin were only 3 in number, standing there just watching the wagons roll up to them. When they got close enough, Sakura realized that she recognized one of the ninja. If she remembered correctly, his name was Baki, and he was the jounin assigned to Gaara and his siblings. Kakashi had also recognized him and had walked up to him. Baki, startled, recognized Kakashi instantly. He grimaced. Kakashi, you are still alive? Kakashi nodded, looking around. So it would seem. And I think I will keep it that way for a while yet. He looked squarely at Baki. Was it necessary to bring this many nin? Sakura looked at the 2 of them, puzzled. The area was empty except for Kakashi, Baki, and 2 more Sand Nin. Baki nodded. The prince is a very important person. His herald told us of the attacks and the assassination attempt. If he were to die while in the custody of Sunagekyo, it would bring shame to our village and our Kazekage. Baki made a hand signal and 100 Sand Nin burst from under the dunes. In a flash they were arranged in flanking positions on either side of the caravan. The prince leaned out of his wagon, not bothering to step outside. Are the preparations being made? He asked Baki. The Sand Jounin nodded. The ship will be waiting at the dock in Ayabayur in 2 weeks. It will take us 1 week to get to Sunagekyo, where your majesty will be hosted by the Kazekage for 2 days. Then we will escort you to the port city of Ayabayur and your ships. Kakashi cocked his head. We will be along for the ride. We will be escorting them while on the ships and until the prince is safely home. Baki looked intently at Kakashi but said nothing. He turned on his heel and as if on cue, the caravan lurched forward, the Sand Nin on either side. Konoha, Asuma could taste the blood in his mouth. He turned his head sideways and spit it to the ground. He looked through the sweat and blood dripping into his eyes at the two ninjas standing in front of him. His body sagged against the ropes that bound him to the post in the middle of the village square. He could hear the sobbing coming from his right. He knew it would be Ino without even looking, but refused to look at her. He would show no fear, facing this punishment. He could sense Kurinia in the crowd as well, and hoped that someone would stop her from doing anything rash. Danzo's voice boomed down at him again. "Warriors of Konoha! This is what happens to failures. Better he died with his team than to come back in shame and disgrace." He nodded to the two ninja in front of Suma again, and they began another round of beatings. Fists and kicks to his face and torso, while he was tied and unable to defend himself. It was a public torture. Asuma could see the logic in it. Danzo was using him to make an example, to set fear in the hearts of would-be rebels. Also, as Asuma was the son of the previous Hokage, it cemented the change even clearer for those that had any lingering doubts as to who ran things now. Part of Asuma wanted to swear at Danzo, to tell him what he thought of the fascist. But that would sign his death warrant, and Asuma had a lot to live for. Also, he was sure Danzo was hoping for just that, and he wouldn't give him the satisfaction. After a few more minutes, Asuma felt the world go black. Shikamaru stared at the scene in front of him, his face impassive, his mind working 1,000,000 miles a minute. To show any emotion would signal to Danzo where his loyalties lie. For some reason he had a feeling that Danzo was always watching. He calculated that Danzo would beat Asuma into a pulp, but there was also a perhaps 50% chance that he would decide to kill him on the spot. Shikamaru was looking at the beating of his sensei, but he was also watching Danzo for any sign of what he was going to do. Shikamaru was planning for that contingency and planning fast. His attention snapped back to Asuma when a final blow to his head knocked him unconscious. He saw the two root ninja look back up at Danzo for directions on what to do next. Shikamaru saw Danzo nod to the ninja with an evil, satisfied grin, and suddenly Shikamaru knew where this was going. They were going to kill Asuma. Shikamaru brought his hands together and made his hand seals quickly. It was time to see if his hastily constructed plan would work. This would have to be flawless. Directly ahead of him was a root ninja. Shikamaru had seen him before, he was an explosives expert. Shikamaru's shadow grabbed his in the thick crowd, unseen. The root ninja didn't have time to react before he found his hands flash down to his waist and launch a series of explosive balls and tags at both Danzo and the two root ninja by Asuma. Shikamaru tried to keep his movements as small as possible so as to not give away what he was doing from the thick of the crowd. He folded his tongue inside his mouth, to ensure that the root ninja couldn't give away what he was doing. The explosives went off close enough to the root ninja to completely distract them from Asuma. Danzo seemed unfazed, scanning for where they came from. Shikamaru acted quickly, releasing the root ninja but grabbing the citizen to his left. He made that citizen push the root ninja into the open space before the ninja could realize he had been released. Shikamaru then released that citizen and shouted, "He's the one! He's attacking the Hokage!" In the melee no one knew who shouted that, but eyes turned towards the ninja who looked bewildered. He opened his mouth to protest but 3 kunai embedded themselves in his chest. Shikamaru had thrown them from the center of the crowd. No one had seen him move. There was general chaos, as some of the explosives were on timed release and were still going off. The crowd began to scatter. Danzo swore, the effectiveness of this execution was now lost. The witnesses to it were leaving. "Throw him in a cell!" he ordered the two root ninja. With one last look at the dead ninja who betrayed him, Danzo turned and went back inside the tower. He knew that ninja personally, and he was loyal to a fault. He had clearly been framed, and Danzo had a limited list of people who would have been able to do that. But he had no proof. It just showed that he was right, that there were ninja working against him instead of for him. But he would crush them. All of them. Konoha would prevail. He, Danzo, would destroy them. 1 week later, Sarakiel, Calamity had exceptionally sharp eyes. It helped her in her archery. She could see targets from a long distance away, and aim with perfect precision. So it was with some confusion that she saw 5 objects fall from the sky a few miles to their right. They were within a few miles of Sarakiel according to Kakashi, and indeed she could see the looming cliffs in the distance. So those falling objects to their right, what were they? Could they be? "Hey Kakashi!" Calamity shouted down at the jounin from her perch atop the lead wagon. Kakashi barely nodded to acknowledge her call-out, his face buried in that book he had started back reading. They were safely in Wind Country territory, so Kakashi gave the illusion of being less alert. Calamity, though, had a feeling he was more alert than ever. For one thing, he hadn't turned a single page in miles. "Sweetie, can you tear yourself away from that book for a second and focus on a real woman?" Calamity said loudly with a smirk on her face. Kakashi blushed and looked up at her, to the accompaniment of laughter from the prince's staff and San Nin in earshot. She nodded off to the east. "I saw 5 objects fall." Kakashi turned quickly and stared off into the distance, his body tensing. The San Nin also seemed to stiffen and look off to the east. After a few seconds, Kakashi relaxed. When he turned back to Calamity, she could see he was replacing the Konoha headband over his Sharingan eye. "Nothing to worry about. Just some foolish birds," Kakashi said nonchalantly and went back to his book. The San Nin laughed and continued walking, glad to be almost home. Calamity glanced at Sakura and Haruka and winked. Looks like the boys had come to Suna as well. The wagon train entered into the city of Sanagekyo with much fanfare. The citizens had come out to greet the prince and his entourage. Streamers floated down and music played. The Kazekage knew how to greet royalty. The prince would spend a lot here and inject money into the local economy. The girls grinned at all the revelry. A stark contrast to the weeks spent in the wastelands and then the desert. "Girls," Hiroka said, "I am absolutely filthy. The very first thing I am doing is finding a hotel room with a cold shower." "Hear, hear!" Calamity chimed in while Sakura nodded vigorously. "Sounds good, girls. Then we can see about finding those foolish birds," Kakashi said quietly, appearing close to them. "And stay close. We are unknown warriors in a ninja village. Do not be fooled by this hospitality. We are being watched very, very closely." The girls looked around and noticed that some of the San Nin were indeed watching them. Kakashi nodded. "Let's do our best to be low-key." The girls shook their heads in agreement. "Hey! Where's Gaara?" A loud voice boomed over the crowds and the music. With a sense of dread, the girls and Kakashi looked back over at the lead wagon. There, in full white suit, with his 2 teammates flanking him in all white, the sun shining behind them like a light, stood Naruto with his hands folded and a huge grin plastered on his face. "Hey Gaara! It's me! Where are you?" he shouted again, laughing. Senjai and Nagi grinning as well. Sakura saw that San Nin were closing in on Naruto and the guys, so she signaled to the girls and they started making their way back to the wagons. A shout went up from the crowd and someone shouted, "It's the Kazekage!" They all looked up and saw Gaara approaching on a wave of sand 20 feet off the ground. Naruto smiled even wider than before and hastened to on top the wave next to Gaara. The crowd gasped and the Sand Ninja, Baki included, drew their weapons to protect the Kazekage. But Naruto made no attacking moves. Instead, he held out his hand to Gaara, who seemed shocked by it all. "Naruto, you are a fool," Gaara said quietly, but without malice, shaking his hand. The Sand Nin seemed to relax their guard a bit, but not completely. Baki recognized now who Naruto was and was startled. The transformation was glaring. The small boy had grown several inches in the past year, and his muscle tone was evident under the white suit he was wearing. Even the white outfit, although odd for a ninja to wear, was a big difference from the orange jumpsuit Naruto was famous for. A lot must have happened to him, Baki thought. Senjai smiled and looked around from their position. Sure, it was a flashy entrance, but really only the Spirit Wolf clan members Ravi and Rashid, brothers, felt like sneaking in would be to their benefit. The city was just a stopping point so that they could get their bearings before starting the search. He spotted a familiar head of pink hair and froze. Sakura, Hiroka and Calamity were glaring at them. He nudged Nagi, who looked over startled. "They look upset. What did you do?" Nagi asked Senjai. "Me?" Senjai replied plaintively. "Naruto is the one pawing around with the Kazekage of this place." Naruto looked carefully at Gaara. "So you're the Kazekage now? Good job," he said without a hint of jealousy. Gaara looked at him, with what could almost be determined to be a smile. "I hear something about a mysterious village at the edge of the world. And its leader, a man in white who wipes out cities with a single blow." Naruto grinned and put his hand behind his head. "Guilty, I guess. So what's with the parade? Knew I was coming? The parade was for me, you young whelp," the prince bellowed from his vantage point near his wagon. He smiled though at the display of power. Gaara on the sand and Naruto appearing next to him by magic. Now stop stealing my thunder and clear the way so my son and I can get to the Kazekage's tower. He laughed as he re-entered the wagon. Naruto flashed back to the wagon with Senji and Nagi while Gaara turned and moved the sand wave back with him towards the tower. There would be time for talking later. Naruto spied the girls after Senji whispered something to him. He looked shocked then ecstatic, waving at them in the crowd and motioning for them to come. The girls continued to glare at the boys, angry at basically being upstaged. All hopes of keeping a low profile gone, they too hopped on top the wagons and rode with them. Kakashi sighed and melted into the crowd. He had seen a flash of a familiar face earlier, so he knew he had something to do. Temari was startled at the change in Naruto. Her brother had changed so much because of this boy that he was never far from her thoughts. When they had heard about his banishment, Gaara was enraged. It had taken them weeks to calm him down, to not go immediately and devastate Konoha. She remembered a loud-mouthed, brash, impulsive boy. What she saw before her was someone else entirely. Not only was he physically different, taller, broader shoulders, his mannerisms had changed. He seemed to be more still. The fidgeting he had been known for was gone. His smile was just as warm and friendly towards them, but something was off. He seemed to have matured, if that was at all possible in such a short space of time. Kankara was looking at her oddly. He had noticed it as well. Gaara was too enthralled with his first real friend to be bothered by either of his siblings at the moment. Nagi and Senji were off to the side of the room, explaining to Sakura, Hiroka and Calamity why they were there. A damn treasure hunt? You've come halfway around the world on a treasure hunt? Calamity said loudly. Temari's head spun towards them. Treasure hunt? And they were in Sunigakure? What treasure? Gaara asked solemnly. Naruto smiled and pointed at Senji. Senji can explain it. Senji launched into the tale of the two swords and how he wanted them for their ability to slay demons. Gaara bristled a bit at this, but Naruto explained the fight they had with Jihun's demons and monsters. Gaara, Temari, and Kankara listened intently. So there is a whole land full of demons? Kankara chimed in. Naruto nodded. That's what Mabry says. The land of the dead and its capital city Yomi. The tailed beasts are just soldiers from there. I spoke to my tenant about it as well. Temari rubbed her chin thoughtfully. Why should you have these swords? If they're in the Wind Country, they belong to the Kazekage, or at the very least the daimyo. Gaara looked at her and shook his head before Senji could protest. We wouldn't even know they existed or their location. He looked over at Naruto and the other members of Tengaku. But Temari makes a valid point. This is our land. We will take a percentage of any treasures found. 50%. Senji opened his mouth to argue, but Naruto glanced at him sharply. This did not silence the two Spirit Wolf clan members, however. Our leader has already bargained for 50%, Ravi exclaimed. Gaara looked at him coldly. He will settle for 25% or nothing at all. Naruto looked around the room and said loudly. Everyone just relax. It's a treasure hunt. It's going to be fun. Worry about the gold and stuff after. He turned back to Gaara and continued with the stories of his adventures since leaving Konoha. The tension in the room remained palpable. Somewhere in Grass Country, Orochimaru sat in his chair and watched the display before him. It was really quite remarkably what a year of training had done for the boy. The added motivation of the sporadic reports of Naruto's progress had spurred him on to even greater heights than Orochimaru had foreseen. Sasuke moved fluidly, decimating the small army gathered before him. His Sharingan eyes spun madly, anticipating moves, countering attacks. His sword lashed out like a viper's tongue, stabbing and maiming, but not killing. This bothered Orochimaru. The boy still seemed reluctant to kill. Not that it mattered. He just wanted the Uchiha's body, skills and eyes to be sufficiently trained for when he took over his body. He had another year or two to wait though. A lot could happen in another year. Kakashi. The voice floated in the air. The alley Kakashi had found himself and only had one exit, but he knew that before entering. He turned around to look lazily at the speaker, the man he had followed. He smiled at the familiar sight of green tights and a bowl haircut, with the thickest eyebrows on any jounin alive. Mato. Kakashi nodded in greeting. Guy seemed different, more sedated. His customary exuberance was missing. Kakashi saw a shadow behind Guy and realized his apprentice and doppelganger was with him as well. "What are you doing in Suna?" Kakashi asked Guy. "I suppose I could ask you the same thing," Guy said, sighing. "Danzo sent us as ambassadors to Suna. We are to appease the Kazekage that Danzo has no intention of moving against him, but wants peace instead. Danzo cannot afford another war as yet. We lost a lot of men in the battle with IWA. Did you hear about that?" Kakashi nodded. "We ran into Asuma a few weeks ago," he told us. Guy looked startled. "You saw Asuma? On his failed mission?" "Ah, yes. I see now. You were protecting the prince. Could you not have let Asuma kill him? His punishment was brutal." Kakashi's eye grew dark. "Tell me." While Guy told the tale of Asuma's public torture and almost execution, Kakashi noticed Lee getting angrier and angrier. There was a lot of pent-up rage in Guy's apprentice. Most likely feeling like there was nothing he could do, Kakashi thought. "So he's locked up in the Konoha dungeons until further notice." Guy finished his tale. Kakashi swore. "I assume it was either the Yamanaka or Nara clan that interfered." Guy nodded. "Shikamaru. Good for him," Kakashi said thoughtfully. Kakashi looked at Lee. "Lee, Sakura and Naruto are in town. Why don't you go and find them?" Lee was dumbstruck. "And Naruto? As Sakura? Here?" He looked at his sensei, who nodded in approval. In a flash, Lee was gone. "Guy, Konoha needs our help. My thoughts when I left was I'd be able to find a way to overthrow him. But it seems our best bet is assassination." Guy sighed. "The man is guarded like an emperor. Impossible to tell how many root members are with him at any given time. And now he has loyal IWA Nin as well. He may not be the strongest ninja, but he's incredibly well guarded. He is always one step ahead." Kakashi paced. "Naruto founded a warrior village. But the place is peaceful. The warriors it would generate are a few years from being ready for any sort of battle. Naruto himself is not ready. He could probably wipe out the city of Konoha, but we need more precision than that. I'm afraid my plan to find help to attack Danzo is a failure. So far. Don't give up hope, Kakashi," Guy said. "You are safe for now. So are Asuma and Anko, who is also in the dungeons. Konoha is hell, but we are alive still. The citizens of Konoha do not need outsiders to save us. We would lose our pride. Our self-respect. We will come up with a better plan soon enough. An opening will appear for one of us to take him out. Till then you are safest far from Konoha." Kakashi swore in frustration. "What are you going to do about Lee? Lee is holding on to a lot of rage. He's helpless like the rest of us. I wish I could find an outlet for him other than training. It seems to add to his feeling of helplessness." Kakashi looked thoughtful. "I'm going on a mission to the Crescent Moon Kingdom. Sakura and her new teammates are protecting the prince. Why not send Lee with us, as a training mission? It would be good for him to have a break from the troubles of Konoha for a while." Mato Guy stared up at the sky. A gust of wind and sand swept past them. "I will be stationed in Suna for a few months. I think that's an acceptable form of training for Lee. I will talk to him later." He walked up to Kakashi and they clasped each other's forearm. "It is good to see you, brother," they both said in unison. "Wow," Naruto remarked as the tiger leaped through the ring of fire to thunderous applause. The massive crowd watching the circus act was very appreciative of the feats. Even ninja appreciated good entertainment. Sakura and Hiroka squealed as a clown squirted water at them. Calamity laughed so hard she almost choked on her cotton candy. They were having a blast just relaxing. The prince and his son sat with Gaara and his siblings in a VIP box in the stands. They were for the most part also enjoying things. Gaara himself seemed impassive, but his siblings and Naruto, who kept glancing at him, could see that he was flabbergasted. Gaara had never had a chance to enjoy such simple pleasures in his life. When the show ended, they gathered outside the main tent. "I love this circus!" the prince exclaimed. "They must come with us to my kingdom!" Alarmed, Sakura and Hiroka tried to explain to the prince that they may be headed into danger, to which he was dismissive. Calamity was watching Hikaru, who seemed fascinated by the tiger that was being rolled away in a cage. A week later, Naruto, Senjai and Nagi stood facing Sakura, Hiroka, Calamity and Lee by the exit of Sunagakure. There had been a lot to catch up on, and Gaara had wanted to hear about Naruto's village and what had happened to him over the past year. Naruto had been thrilled to be talking to Gaara again. A person from his past who had no grudges towards him. A real friend. Still, Naruto found himself not revealing the exact location of his village. He didn't know why, but felt he should keep that secret for now. Nagi and Senjai had smiled and let Naruto catch up, meanwhile exploring the city themselves. Neither had ever been this far east, and it was vastly different from anything they'd ever seen. The girls had been keeping an eye on the prince and his son, but also glad to share their tales of this mission with the boys' team. Lee's tearful reunion with Naruto and Sakura was an embarrassing spectacle. His appearance had shocked everyone. Naruto and Sakura for a friend they hadn't seen in a year. Nagi, Senjai, Hiroka and Calamity for his appearance. They had all gotten along well, although the girls were at first hesitant about him coming along on their mission. Kakashi explained to them that Lee was a formidable fighter, and they had no idea what they were getting themselves into by going to that island. Today they were all parting ways. Naruto and his team were going treasure hunting, and the girls were going with the prince to the port city to set sail. Be safe, Sakura! Lee! Naruto waved exuberantly. Take care of yourselves, Hiroka! Kalam! Hiroka and Senjai exchanged a look that didn't need words spoken. Pride, desire, happiness, worry. It was all there. Calamity winked at Kakashi and hopped on top the nearest wagon, ready for her trip. Kakashi nodded at the boys and Guy who stood nearby. Kakashi also noted several new additions to the prince's entourage, going about hustling and getting the caravans ready. He looked at them carefully, noting their faces for future reference to walk to the head of the caravan. The two groups parted ways, off to their own individual adventures. Right. So what's first? Naruto turned around and asked Nagi and Senjai. Senjai grinned. Well, we have our map, and we have a starting point. The Kazekage has assigned a team to us, with camels and supplies. It's a few days' walk from here. Nagi looked at the two of them and smiled. Naruto, aren't you worried about the girls? Kakashi made it seem like they might be walking into a trap. Naruto shook his head. Kakashi is with them, so is Lee. Plus those girls can really fight. I trust them. Besides, I have a backup plan in place. Wanna let us in on it? Nagi asked. Naruto laughed. Not really. Let's go treasure hunting. The boys found their group preparing to ride out. Kankuro was with them. Gaara asked me to accompany you. I feel he would have liked to come himself, but there are a lot of duties associated with being Kazekage. He offered by way of explanation. The two Spirit Wolf clan members sat on their camels, lower half of their faces covered by their scarves. Their eyes glared at Kankuro, obviously upset that he was coming along. Perhaps they hoped we could leave without giving Gaara his share, Senjai thought amusedly. Maybe they don't realize we have thousands of miles of sand all around us, and pissing off a Kage who wields the power of sand would be monumentally stupid. Naruto just smiled and nodded. They all mounted the camels and rode out, very uncomfortably, towards their treasure. As they left through the exit, they took a sharp turn east, riding around the cliffside of the village. That is the direction we must go, Kankuro said, pointing towards what looked like a shimmering lake, and barely discernible mountains. Senjai, Nagi and Naruto stared at the sweltering, shimmering plain before them, wondering what they had gotten themselves into. A few days later, Sakura looked out at the ocean, feeling the sea breeze against her face. She hadn't been on a ship since Naruto, Sasuke and she had been to the land of snow. She smiled as she remembered that time, a much more innocent time for her. Lee was nearby, as he always was these days. But he was not the Lee Sakura remembered. He was much more quiet, much more reserved. His training also seemed ridiculous. Even on the ship he climbed ropes, did laps on the railing of the boat, threatening to fall off and into the water below any second. Sakura didn't remember him being this way. It was disconcerting. Lee had been told to not tell Sakura and the girls about the fate of Asuma, and he obeyed his teacher. The girls didn't need the guilt of that to distract them from the mission at hand. He did, however, take it upon himself to act as the girls' guardian. Lee knew he owed Naruto that much. He didn't doubt they could handle themselves, but yet he vowed to himself that he would let not one drop of their blood hit the ground. Calamity sat lazily in a deck chair. The ship was massive, and had a swimming pool in the front deck. As she lazed around, she idly wondered at the way the world works. One day they're fighting for their lives in the forests of the Badlands. Next they're crossing a massive desert. Then they're being hosted by the Kazakage as special guests. Now they were on a luxury liner headed to the world-famous Crescent Moon Kingdom, but it was probably a death trap waiting for them. Life was funny. One of the servants was throwing a bucket of dishwater off the back of the boat when he slipped and fell over the railing. Another servant tried to grab onto him but missed and failed. The servant who fell did a backflip in midair and attached his feet to the hull of the ship. Phew! He let a gasp of relief escape his lips. He was preparing to climb back up when a wave splashed up and hit him full force against the hull. He popped into smoke. The watching servant sighed and went back about his work. Hundreds of miles away, a ship that should not be able to float eased its way through the waters of the Eastern Ocean. Its crew a motley assembly of the undead, flesh rotting even further in the sea air. As one, all their heads turned to the east. 30 voices spoke as one. The 9 times cursed one has been found, Master Jihun. We are sailing to the east. We have found something. One of the Suna men that accompanied them shouted down to Naruto's team. They had been in the mountains for days now, following the map that Senji had found. Kankuro said that no one from Suna ever came this way anymore. The mountains were a death trap if you got caught in a sandstorm. Millions of loose rocks and boulders would batter a person to a pulp, he explained. Plus the trade routes had changed. Senji and Nagi were the first ones up the slope towards where the Suna man had called out to them. There was a small trail, long since abandoned. Right to the side of the trail there was a 3-foot-tall stone tablet. They all gathered around and looked at it in awe. There, engraved in the stone, were 3 heads. The place where might have been 3 crowns implanted in the stone were scratches and digs. This must be where that diary said they pried off the crowns of the 3 kings, Nagi said excitedly. Kankuro stared in disbelief. He had partly believed that this was all a waste of time, but to actually see this marker. So what does the marker say? Senji asked, but not to anyone in particular. Kankuro spoke up. It's a very old language, and I don't understand all of it. But it says beware the 3 kings. They walk. Beware the 3 kings. The power of the ancients within. Beware the 3 kings, a soft whisper blew through the gathered men. To hell with this, one of the Suna men said and turned around, determined to walk home. Kankuro grabbed the ninja before he went too far and reminded him that Gaara had ordered him to accompany them. The man grew pale and stood his ground. So where do we go from here? Nagi asked. Let's look around. If this is a grave marker, the tomb has to be nearby, Kankuro said. They all split up to scour the hillside. Several hours later, no one had found any sign of an entrance. They made a small camp as night was falling. The Sunanin were seeing about the fire and food while Naruto and company discussed where to go from here. There has to be a clue somewhere here, Senji said frustratingly. Kankuro nodded in agreement. The marker would not be here if the tomb is not here. It is here somewhere. One of the Suna men spoke up. We should not stay here. This mountain is cursed. Death will stalk us here. Kankuro growled at him. You are ninja of Sunagakure. Death is always on our backs. We will face anything that comes with honor, the honor befitting of Suna. Do not let me hear you speak of this again. Silence fell over the camp, just the sound of the fire crackling broke the cool evening. A soft wind blew through the camp, a ghostly laughter faintly drifting through the air. The camels started to make noise, pulling hard against the ropes that bound them. All the warriors stood up and looked around. The laughter seemed to come from everywhere yet nowhere. That's pretty creepy, Naruto said out loud. The laughter died down and the wind dropped all of a sudden. Kankuro noticed the change in the temperature, from cool evening to a fast rise in heat. That plus the lack of wind. Sandstorm! He shouted. The Sunanin ran for the camels, taking long cloaks with them. They each tackled the camels to the ground, covering their eyes, and pulling the heavy cloaks over both themselves and the camels. Muttering a jutsu that all Sunanin learn at a young age, the cloaks became a thin sheet of solid rock. Strong enough to protect from sand, but not much else. Naruto! Guys! Kankuro bellowed at them as the wind picked up to a shrieking gale. Find shelter! Fast! He too lay down flat, dragging his cloak over himself. Senji, Nagi and Naruto looked at each other. Remind me to ask them about that trick afterward, Nagi shouted at Senjai before melting into the shadows. Senjai took his swords and slashed as hard as he could against the ground, forming a hole which he hopped inside. He had done this a long time ago, when he'd first seen Naruto go berserker, so he hoped it would protect him against what was coming. Naruto saw the two Spirit Wolf clan members looking around frantically for somewhere to shelter. He formed a quick Rasengan and slammed it into a giant rock. It created enough of a space for both of them. He ushered them inside and, forming two more clones, moved another rock in front of it. There was still plenty space, but it was better than nothing. That just left Naruto exposed as the sandstorm hit them. The noise was deafening, more than just sand, it was rocks and boulders the size of people being flung around like leaves. Naruto was going to create another Rasengan hole for himself, but saw rocks heading for the cloaks sheltered Sunanin and Kankuro. Before he could react, one giant boulder smashed through one, shattering the cloak like glass. Blood and screams erupted from the impact, to be drowned out by the noise of the sand and the wind. Naruto saw more rocks heading for the others and acted without thinking. He pushed his hands forward, feeding chakra into it, as much as he could muster. He forced an immeasurable amount of wind in a blast to move those rocks away from his comrades. It was an explosion of gravel and dust as the force of the wind coming from the east met the force of Naruto's wind chakra blast. The unstoppable force of a sandstorm met the immovable force of Naruto's jutsu. Rocks that were caught in the middle turned to dust. Dust found itself pushed to the side and around. Naruto parted the sandstorm like a rock in a stream, making it go around the encampment. Kankuro could not believe his eyes. He could see through a crack in his cloak to what Naruto was doing. That shouldn't be possible. Naruto fell to one knee, feeling the strain on his body. But the sandstorm was not letting up. He called on all the chakra he had, needing it to fight against nature itself. Suddenly Senjai was there behind him, bracing his back. The whole Senjai was fine, but he could see Naruto needed some help. A heartbeat later and Nagi was there too. Both of them held him up straight, while he pushed chakra and wind to battle the storm. Seconds turned to minutes. It felt like an eternity, but Naruto held on. As fast as it began, it was over. The wind just stopped and became normal again. The last of Naruto's chakra blast decimated a path in front of them, crumbling boulders and pieces of the cliffs to dust before he could stop. He fell backwards, but Nagi and Senjai caught him. The Sunanin released their jutsus and clambered back to their feet. The Spirit Wolf brothers broke free of their shelter, staring in disbelief at Naruto. They'd seen everything from their vantage point. This was the leader of their village. A man who could fight against the power of a sandstorm and win. Naruto fainted into a deep sleep. "Is he alright?" Kankuro asked. Senjai grinned but didn't bother to answer as Naruto let out a loud snore. "He'll be fine," said Nagi with a smile. Kankuro went to check on the Sunanin who had been crushed. The cloak jutsu only protected against sand, not rocks as large as this one. As he approached, though, he saw a hole in the ground where the huge rock had hit. Looking closer, through the gore and body of the crushed Sunanin, was a hole leading into the ground. The rock had passed clean through him and broken into some underground chamber. Moving aside what was left of the body carefully, he peered into the hole. It was at least 2 feet in diameter, but it was clear that it was a lot deeper than one might initially think. After staring into it for a few seconds, he called out to the others. "Over here! The tomb is under us!" Chapter 19, Break. Konoha. It was an odd smell, ammonia and fur together. It assaulted the senses. Shikamaru shrugged it off and looked back at Kiba. His face smiled, his voice was steady and sure as he spoke to his friend in his recovery bed in the Inuzuka clan grounds. "I'm very glad you are healing, Kiba," Shikamaru said elatedly. "Your bravery in the war against the Wagakure will be noticed, I'm sure." He grasped Kiba's hand in a firm shake and let go, beaming. Kiba was not the brightest of the rookie 9, but neither was he a fool. Shikamaru was not the overly joyous type, nor was he about to congratulate anyone for that battle. He glanced down at the piece of string he felt in his hand. The string that Shikamaru had slipped there. The string was exceedingly thin, impossible to see from any distance away. Kiba felt a chakra pulse coming from the string, and realized it was Shikamaru. Old ninja code. Shikamaru was sending pulses in numeric sequences. Kiba grasped the idea. Shikamaru didn't want anyone to hear what he really had to say. He frowned. But that would mean that Shikamaru didn't trust the safety of the clan buildings, Or maybe the clan itself. His clan. Their teachers had spent the better part of a month training them in this code. A useful technique. Kiba hadn't really wanted to pay attention, but his mother had beaten some sense into him. This could one day save his life. He focused on the pulses Shikamaru was sending. So when do you think you'll be back on your feet? Shikamaru said out loud. Kiba felt for the pulses. Danzo almost killed Asuma. Kiba didn't move, afraid to betray what was going on. He cleared his throat after a few seconds. Any day now. I feel fine, but my mother won't release me just yet. Kiba tried really hard to remember the right codes and sent his own chakra up the string. What do we do now? Shikamaru smiled in relief. He wasn't sure Kiba would pick up on the chakra pulses. That's good, that's very good. When she does release you, we need to get back to training. Since I'm a Chunin now, I want your nose available for any missions I need you for. I won't leave him to rot in the dungeons until Danzo decides to kill him. Kiba took a few seconds to decipher what Shikamaru had said, then nodded. He didn't even bother sending the chakra pulses in reply. Of course. I'll be ready. Ino snuck a glance across the courtyard. The Umbu guarding this side entrance to the Konoha dungeon stood alert. She kept strolling, making sure not to seem too stiff or interested in his presence. Ever since Shikamaru had spoken to them about training harder, she had been practicing. Her new technique was still not up to where she thought it was perfected, but hopefully it would be up to the task that had been assigned to her. Her clan specialized in mind reading and manipulation. They did, however, require one of two things, either physical contact or eye contact. She decided against the physical contact, as that might be picked up on a lot easier. The scarf around her neck fluttered in the wind. She knew her blonde hair would also be blowing a bit. Ino was well aware that she was growing into a pretty woman. It was time to see if that male guard would notice. She allowed her scarf to blow off her neck and she reached up to catch it. Her line of sight crossed the guards, whose eyes had immediately latched onto her movement, and lingered there. She smiled at him as her eyes met his, and struck. Softly. Quickly. In a second it was over and she was out. He smiled back at her through his mask and looked away, again on alert guarding the entrance. She kept walking, holding a tight grimace on her face. It was a bit of a strain. In this technique she didn't go looking for a specific memory, she took all of the surface memories. Every single one, in one single swipe. Ino went into a tea shop and sat down, closing her eyes. She wordlessly waved away the waitress and signaled for some tea. She felt the pressure as the jumble of memories burned her mind. She sifted through them as fast as she could, knowing that she could only hold on to this much for so long. There. She thought, looking at one particular scene. Found him. Ino bolted from the table and raced for the bathroom. She barely made it there before she threw up. The effort of that jutsu was still a lot for her to handle. Hinata stood in the courtyard, facing her father. He looked sternly down at her. You what? He asked gruffly. I want to learn it, she repeated, standing steadfast. Seeing her friends hurt, the massacre of the war, the cruelty of Danzo had changed something inside Hinata. Suddenly disappointing her father seemed like such a small thing. The style you wish to learn is beyond you, Hayashi said, not unkindly yet firmly. You cannot even best your smaller sister in a fight. Hinata exclaimed in exasperation. She is my younger sister! And she looks like mother. I cannot strike her. She shook her head and looked down at her hands. We have to do something. There is no one to save us from this world but ourselves and those we trust. Everyone else is getting stronger, I need to as well. She looked up at her father, directly in his eyes. He didn't see a single sign of weakness nor a hint of the tears he was sure she'd be shedding. Despite himself, he let a small smile slip out. He had always wanted Hinata to be stronger. When her mother died he had lost so much, and both she and Hanabi looked so much like her. Hayashi had not known how to raise daughters. Hanabi took to his style of parenting very well, but Hinata had always been softer. Now he saw strength, and strength Hayashi could work with. He shifted his legs apart, and raised one hand palm upwards towards her. Then come, daughter, and show me what you know. Hinata looked at him and felt a slight bit of shock. Her father was acknowledging her. Part of her wanted to exclaim in joy, but now was not the time. She faced him squarely, determined to show him how far she had come. She burst forward, her speed momentarily catching Hayashi off guard. Her straight arm palm thrust at his midsection was easily blocked, his hands sweeping down. Her arm bent at the elbow though, and her elbow became an attack on his blocking arm, catching it a glancing blow. Hayashi turned and struck out himself. His fingers jabbed outwards, aiming for her inner arm. Hinata opened her arms wider and dodged the jab. She punched with her right hand only to have Hayashi block with his left, twisting around her forearm. He withdrew, then punched with both hands. He blocked from the inside, parrying them outwards with both of his hands. She kicked with her left leg and he raised his leg, bringing his knee level and blocking the kick. She swept her right arm in a roundhouse punch, which he avoided by stepping back, but she paused after missing and brought her fist back in a backhand, stepping in. Hayashi kicked forward straight, but Hinata blocked his kick with her foot. He punched forward, but Hinata, copying one of his moves, parried it from the inside. She dropped her arms to her waist and turned, moving her body into his. Hayashi could barely withhold the feeling of shock as Hinata penetrated his defenses. True, he was not going all out on her, but nonetheless it was a skillful maneuver. Hinata bent at the waist, backwards, her right hand coming up and over her face towards his neck in a thrust that would incapacitate a lesser opponent. Hayashi too bent backwards to avoid it, grasping her shirt and heaving her over his twisting body in a throw. In midair, Hinata twisted her body and held on tightly to her father's arm. With another twist she brought her feet together under his arm towards his ribcage. It was inventive, it was impromptu. Hinata smiled for the briefest of moments. It was Naruto. Hayashi grunted as Hinata's kick connected. She did not use enough force to crack anything, but he felt it nonetheless. It was a move that you did not learn in their open palm style, but it worked, so he would not begrudge her that. He brought his left hand across and closed off her right leg chakra points. Hinata grunted a little bit in pain as she broke free of his grasp and fell to the ground, still managing to land on her feet. Hayashi saw her take the ready stance again, ignoring the pain she had to be feeling in that leg. He lowered his guard and nodded at Hinata, with the smallest hint of a smile. Hinata wanted to scream in happiness. Her father accepted her, approved of her. Hayashi cleared his throat. The first thing you need to know about the twin lion step style is that it is a savage dance. Shino gathered his necessities in his sack and left it on his bed. He would not be taking it now, but when he did return he did not expect to have the time to then pack. He prided himself on his clinical ability to plan ahead. He could admit, however, very clinically, that Shikamura was the best tactician he had ever met. The plan would work. The plan for after the plan would work as well. The plan after that, though, was where the trouble would begin. Middle of the ocean, 7 days west of the Crescent Moon Kingdom. Lee was crazy. That had to be it, Hiroka told herself for the 100th time that week. His latest form of training was swimming after their ship. Not only was it an insane thing to do in the middle of the ocean, but they were moving at 30 knots, so it was insane that he could keep up. Not only that, but he had stripped down to just the shorts so she could see the weights attached to his legs and arms. The boy needed professional help. Calamity, Sakura and herself leaned against the back railing of the stern of their ship, watching Lee's figure swim the chop behind them. It was getting on in the evening, and he'd been at it for an hour. They were just about to call out to him and let him know it was time to come in when a cry went up from the crow's nest. "Ship on the horizon! Starboard!" The girls walked over to the right side of the boat and saw the speck on the horizon. It was getting larger, so it seemed to be headed in their direction. Lee joined them after a minute, drying off with his towel. "What's going on?" he asked, breathing heavily from the exertion. "There's a ship," Hiroka began, only to be interrupted by Calamity. "Frel! That's a pirate ship!" she exclaimed. "What?" the others asked in unison. Calamity's eyesight was magnificent, so they did not doubt her. Seconds later the same cry came from the crow's nest again. "Pirates!" The crew was a blur as it moved to speed up the ship to twice what it was before. The wind whipped at the girls as the ship sped ahead, trying to outrun the intercept path of the pirates. For some reason, though it didn't seem to work, within minutes it was clear the pirate ship had changed course and not only would intercept them, but was gaining speed even faster than this luxury liner was able to attain. The prince and his son were suddenly on the deck. "What's going on?" he asked frantically. Ikaro clutched looked at Calamity expectantly. "Pirates, your highness, they're gaining fast," Kakashi said calmly as he approached. "I suggest you get below. We will deal with it," The prince nodded and left to go below. Calamity looked at Ikaro and touched her bow. The boy understood and clutched his own bow and the arrows the two of them had made together. He would protect his dad. Within minutes the pirate ship was close enough that they could make out the state of it. Shockingly, the ship seemed to be already destroyed. It had a huge hole in one side, the sails were in tatters, one of its masts was broken. It was a wreck. The crew nervously poured as much power into their steam engine as they could, but the ship still gained on them. As the ship pulled up alongside, they could finally see the crew of that dilapidated ship. Pirates in various forms of decomposition were animatedly gathering their weapons. Swords and pistols were unsheathed, and unholy groans and howls echoed over the sea to the crew of the prince's liner. Kakashi stood stunned. A ship of the undead. Calamity, take a few out, let's see what happens, Kakashi asked of her. With a shudder, Calamity notched several arrows to her bow. With pleasure. A sharp twang and 3 arrows found their targets. 3 bodies were thrown backwards from the force of the impact. The other pirates didn't seem fazed in the least. With good reason, it seems, as the 3 hit pirates got to their feet and didn't even both to pull the arrows out, just stood there, waiting for the ships to get close enough to board. Hiroka shivered. What are they? Kakashi shook his head. Reanimated corpses. I've seen jutsu that can do this. The only way to kill them is to remove the head or destroy the brains. An arrow won't do the job, Calamity. You need to completely destroy the brain. We must not let them board. When they are close enough, start your attacks. Sakura fixed her steely gaze on the ship as it approached. She heard a click and saw Lee gently remove his weights from his legs and his wrists, and lay them on the deck. He saw her look at him, and he spoke as he looked back across the water. Guy-sensei once told me only to remove the weights if in the battle my life or someone else's life I wish to protect depended on it. But I've seen war. In every battle a life hangs in the balance. He cracked his knuckles and his neck. The ship was within 15 feet of them. Let's show these guys the fires of our youth, Lee cried out as he sprung from the railings and, flipping in the air, landed on the pirate ship. As he landed, a pirate shot a pistol at him. Lee bent at the waist and twisted to the side. The bullet took out a pirate behind him. Lee sped in and, with a solid punch to the chin, sent the undead pirate flying backwards. A light whistle alerted Lee to the danger, and he ducked low as a blade sliced the air above him. He back-flipped and struck with his foot the top of the pirate who had swung the sword's head, crushing the top of his skull. The pirate fell in a heap and didn't move. Lee, satisfied that this method would kill them, continued to attack. Sakura and Hiroka landed on the deck. Sakura was a blur of fists, her first punch atomizing a zombie pirate's head. Hiroka twisted and snaked her scarf towards another, sending chakra pulses down it, to wrap it around the neck of a pirate. With a switch of her stance and a twist of her body, she pulled and snapped the neck. Knowing she needed to do more than that though, she heaved harder and crushed the neck completed, and pulled the head off the shoulders, ripping the decomposing skin and tendons. The head rolled and Hiroka pulled her scarf in for another attack. A pirate slashed at Sakura, forcing her to dodge left, right, then left again. The undead sailor pressed her, kept pushing and slicing the air with his sword as she dodged. Frustrated, the pirate pulled out his pistol and fired point blank. Sakura didn't have time to move as the slug hit her in the side and passed right through, impacting the rotten wooden cabin behind her. The pirate leaned in, his foul breath close to Sakura. "Where is the 9 times cursed one?" his eerie voice demanded. "His scent is on you." Sakura reached up and jabbed her fingers under his chin, penetrating the soft flesh there and pulling hard, ripped his lower jaw out. Her other fist cocked back and destroyed the pirate's head. She clutched her side, quickly applied a local numbing jutsu. It would not fix the damage, but she wouldn't feel it for a few minutes. It had passed clean through and was far enough to her side that she wasn't worried about it. Back on the prince's ship, the crew members and the prince's entourage stood watching. Several members of the entourage looked anxiously on as the girls and Lee battled the undead pirates. Kakashi noticed them and looked for a few seconds before smirking behind his mask. He turned his attention back to the pirate ship. "The girls are doing a good job, Lee, as well. But there are too many pirates. We need to destroy the ship completely," Kakashi said out loud to no one in particular. Calamity looked at him for a second, then grinned. She pulled out her arrows and started attaching exploding tags to the tips. She didn't have the chakra control to set these off, but she could place them, and then maybe. She looked at Kakashi questioningly, and he looked back, nodding. She began firing the arrows into the hull of the ship, at equal distances, 5 feet apart. Thud. Thud. They lined the bottom hull of the ship. Lee got sliced by a lucky pirate, his arm bleeding. He swiveled and crushed the pirate's face with the heel of his boot. Hiroka cried angrily out as a sword punched a hole in her scarf. A hail of pistol fire aimed at her, but she flipped and jumped high into the air, dodging well. Kakashi saw what was going on and shouted at one of the prince's entourage. "Go get them!" Calamity was confused as to why Kakashi would tell civilians to enter the battle, but watched wide-eyed as 5 normal-looking men jumped the distance to the pirate ship. One guy ran to where Sakura was. She saw him coming and looked perplexed for a second. But in a flash he was by her side, and within a blink they appeared back on the ship. Lee as well was grabbed by one of the entourage, and in a blink of an eye they were back on the ship. Hiroka was able to jump back over on her own, landing next to Sakura who was bleeding. Kakashi whistled hard and the 3 entourage members left on the pirate ship grinned and waved back. One of them dove over the railing and released a pulse of weak chakra. He dispersed into a cloud of smoke, but had sacrificed his chakra to light all the exploding tags. "What the hell?" Hiroka exclaimed. "Shadow clones!" Sakura cried out. "Naruto?" The 2 remaining clones on the ship let go their henge and resumed the appearance of Naruto, replete in his white suit. "The 9 times cursed one," all the pirates said in unison. "Our master searches for you. We will take you to our master." Naruto grinned back at them. "Fat chance zombie pirates. Ninjas win every time." With a chakra push of wind, the 2 Narutos pushed the prince's ship away from the pirate ship. The exertion caused both to puff into clouds of smoke, seconds before the pirate ship exploded into nothing but splinters and tattered rags. Bodies were flung into the sky and into the ocean. Nothing remained of the ship. Sakura turned to the entourage member who had harassed her to the prince's ship. "Naruto!" He looked at her sheepishly. "You've got red on you." To the east of Sunagakure, Naruto awoke with a start. The memories of the battle on the pirate ship came flooding into him. He smiled as he realized that the girls had fought better than he thought they would, and vowed to not underestimate them again. He looked around and realized they were in a dark cavern. Lit torches surrounded them, and some distance away Nagi and Senji were talking heatedly with Kankuro and the Sunanin. Naruto struggled to his feet and walked over. "What's going on, guys?" They stopped talking and looked over at him. "Naruto!" Senji exclaimed happily. "Glad you're all right." Kankuro nodded. Naruto continued to surprise him. That display of power earlier had been impressive. "So where are we?" Naruto asked, looking around. The cavern they were in seemed to be man-made. Ornate pillars stretched up to the ceiling. The walls seemed to be alive with carvings and paintings. "Well, the storm punched a hole in the ceiling of this place, so we climbed in. It seems to be a main hall. An entryway into the tomb of the 3 kings," Kankuro replied. "Excellent," Naruto said. "So let's go get those swords for you, Senji." He strode forward only to be grabbed back by Nagi. "No, Naruto," he said, gripping Naruto's arm tightly. "It's booby-trapped. There are warnings all over the walls about entering the chamber." Naruto shrugged. "I'll send in some shadow clones and we'll see what the traps are." He made the hand signals for his favorite jutsu only for nothing. Nothing happened. "Hey, what's going on?" he asked, perplexed. Senji nodded. "Yeah, all of us. I can't feel any chi. Nagi can't use his abilities. Kankuro said he can't create chakra strings for his puppets. In this chamber there seems to be some method to suppress chakra." Naruto scowled. "So what are we going to do?" The Spirit Wolf clan members came over with notes between them, having been studying the wall drawings. "We think we have all the clues to enter the chamber," Ravi said. Rashid nodded. "Yes, there are 3 tests. One each devised for each of the 3 kings. First, show your respect to the royal king. Secondly, follow in the footsteps of the avenging son. Thirdly, you must stay true and uphold the honor of the assassin." Naruto stared at them. "Okay, so what does that mean?" The Spirit Wolf brothers looked at each other and shrugged. "I don't know. Guess we'll find out." Kankuro growled. "We will send in one of my men to check it out." He waved over one of the Sunanin, wearing his dust-colored coat over a dark red shirt. "Go take a look. Carefully," Kankuro ordered the ninja. The ninja nodded and entered what was a long, dark tunnel. The torch seemed to make little to no impact on the darkness of the tunnel. After a few seconds, Naruto and the others could only make out the barest flicker of the light. A whistle of air and the light fell to the ground. Moments later, the head of the Sunanin rolled to the feet of Kankuro, who looked at it in shock. Naruto swore. Okay, that didn't work. We are not sending in any more people until we can figure out those clues. Kankuro looked over at him with regret and surprise on his face. We're Sunanin. We do not back down. Naruto was upset at the unnecessary death. No one is backing down, but even I don't rush into a trap. Remembering how he used to be on his first mission, he sheepishly grinned and rubbed the back of his neck as he admitted. Anymore. Nagi looked thoughtful. His head is severed clean. Means a blade took it off. So the first trap is one or several blades. In the darkness it would be impossible to see those coming, and the corridor only allows for one person at a time. Naruto said thoughtfully. I can do it, Senji said calmly. No, Senji, wait. We can figure out another way, Naruto said. Hey, they don't call me the Dark Blade for nothing, Naruto. Remember my Q-Might match? He replied. Besides, this whole hunt was my idea, and I'm the one who wants the swords, so the risk should be mine. Naruto did remember that match. He had fought blindfolded and won against a very skilled opponent. With a sigh, Naruto nodded. If you lose your head, I promise you I will stick it in a men's room toilet when we get home for all of eternity. Nagi grinned at Senji. 10 silver says you get injured. Senji laughed. Taken. He entered the corridor without a torch. Walking slowly, Senji closed his eyes. He couldn't see anyway and didn't want anything to distract from his other senses. He took step after step, feeling the stone floor turn a little slippery. The blood from the unfortunate Sunanin was seeping down the corridor. Senji knew he should be okay up until he reached the actual body. As his feet found the body, he heard a slight whistle. Senji bent backwards at the waist, feeling a long, sharp blade cut the air above him. He straightened up, hearing now machinery moving as the blade came around again. This time he dove forward. He felt another blade coming up from the right, designed to cut a person in two. He rolled and came to a stop when he hit something hard. The blade stopped. Senji opened his eyes. The darkness of the corridor was behind him, but the small room at the end of the corridor he could barely see in. Looking at what he was leaning against, he realized it was a statue of a king sitting on a throne. Humph, he whispered to himself. Show your respect, huh? Wanted us to bow and kneel to you before we enter? Way to command respect, your highness. He stood up, seeing in the dim light a small room to the left that had gears and housed what looked like the blades. He went into the room and with a heave pulled one of the cogs out. He went back outside. Hey guys, it's clear! Come on in! He shouted to his friends. Naruto and the crew entered the tunnel, making their way past the trap. The Sunanin grabbed their friend and wrapped the body in his cloak. They gently laid him down to the side of the little chamber they were in. Kankuro looked up at the statue of the king. He looks just like my father, he remarked. Stern, cruel. Naruto put his hand on his shoulder and looked to the spirit wolf brothers in the dim light. They nodded back and raised their torches. Beyond the statue was Anther Tunnel. Follow the footsteps of the avenging sun. Senji sighed and entered the tunnel again, noticing this one was a lot shorter. Guys? Can you come up here? They all entered the tunnel and came out into the chamber that Senji was in. It was a large room with large square stone tiles. At the far end they spied a statue of a ninja, spear in one arm, body leaning to one side, hand out in a beckoning signal. All kind of alarms are going off in my head right now, Senji said. This is very dangerous. Nagi looked carefully at the runes on the floor. These are martial art markings, he said. Names of positions. Riding horse. Crane with one wing. He looked up at the statue. This is a test of your taijutsu skills. We need to do just the right moves in just the right sequence in order to get past this one. Naruto frowned. I'm not a taijutsu expert. Senji shrugged. Neither am I. The Spirit Wolf clan brother said. We are, but we work in tandem. I doubt the trap will allow two people to pass. Kankuro shook his head. I am a puppet master. My hand-to-hand combat is rudimentary. Nagi sighed. I am probably our best shot here. My style is capoeira, but maybe I can adapt it slightly to pass this test. He stepped up to what he thought was the starting block. He stared at the blocks around him for a few minutes, in dead silence. Everyone watched him nervously. Nagi brought his hands to his side and twisted his back leg back in a basic capoeira move, then in a twirl he was off. He landed in spread stance, saying quietly the title on the blocks. The tiger hugs its head. His left hand in a fist over his head, his right arm palm backwards across his chest. He swung his leg forward, shifted his weight to it, and somersaulted to the next set of stones. 2 small darts flew up from stones dangerously close to Nagi, surprising everyone. He landed on another stone, on one leg, the other up across his thigh, his arms back and front in a gripping position. Hegeman King pours his drink. Careful, Nagi! Kankuro shouted out. I can smell the poison in the darts from here. 1 graze and you'll be dead in 30 seconds. Nagi let a drop of sweat fall. Thanks. Senjai barked out. This is a chance to win back your 10 silver. Nagi grinned and looked around at the stones. If this were his taijutsu form, he just went from a defensive stance to a multi-use attack and defense one. The next logical step would be an attack, then a counter block, then an attack, then a defense. He spied the closest attack step and moved towards that stone. He swept his legs underneath himself and sprang forward onto one hand, palms springing across to an overhead kick, then spinning around and landing in a grasshopper stance. He was halfway across the room. Naruto watched quietly and anxiously as one of his best friends risked everything on a martial arts style he wasn't familiar with. Although he did look natural while doing it. Nagi flipped again, landing on his left leg. Then it happened. There was a creak and a spike fell from the ceiling, aimed right for the tile he was on. Nagi spied it and lunged onto another tile. Another spike fell. Apparently the test was meant to be done faster, Nagi thought, then inwardly summoning up his courage. He moved completely on instinct. He danced his capoeira, using his moves, flips and attack stances as he moved from tile to tile. He heard a click beneath one of his steps, and he dodged just in time to avoid darts being shot out of the stone. Another ominous click and the floor erupted in a swarm of darts. Nagi twisted and flipped, moving as fast as he could. There were gaps in the attack, gaps where he would be unharmed. He moved, danced, turned and flipped his way through the openings. Finally, he landed on the far side of the room, collapsing to his knees. Nagi! Naruto shouted, about to run out after his friend. Nagi raised his hand. Wait. I'm alright. Just need to catch my breath. He stood up slowly, breathing in deep. That was close. He saw a lever by the statue and pulled on it. The statue shifted slightly to the right and the floor resonated with a click. He picked up a rock and skipped it across the floor. No darts rose up. Okay, look safe now, Nagi said, motioning them over. They cautiously walked over to him, spying a door behind the statue. They cautiously opened it and entered the next room. In the room stood a pedestal with 2 swords. Surrounding the room was many piles of gold, jewelry and coins, rare stones and statues. The wealth of an ancient kingdom all in this room. All eyes though were on the pedestal in the middle of the room, for next to it stood a ghost of a man. Nuga Dangsanoon! The eerie voice echoed in the cavern, the ghost pointing at Senjai. They looked at each other curiously. Kankuro cleared his throat. It's an old language. As royalty I was taught it, but it's not used anymore. He asked, who are you? Senjai cleared his throat. I am Senjai. These are my friends. I have come for Ganjiang and Moe. Before Kankaro could translate, the ghostly figure laughed eerily. Ganjian? Moe? Wei Dangsanai Gyudil have Nika? He asked, why should you have them? Kankuro chimed in afterwards. Yeah. Senjai nodded. I figured he said something like that. I will use them to kill demons and protect my friends. Kankuro translated for the ghost, who looked at him sharply. Kalyilnian Hizaangi Wihi Mandulio Jio Subnida. Dangsanai Gyudili Dihi Han Chingwi Hizangea Habnida. He whispered in the gloomy cavern. You must sacrifice, kill, one of us to get the swords. Kankuro said incredulously. And yes, I think he's serious. Senjai stared at the ghost before him. I will not. The ghost did not wait for Kankaro's translation. Julium Dangsanoon Jugyul Geosida. Then you will die, Kankuro said. The room began to shake and rocks began to fall. We need to get out of here. He and the Sunanin went back through into the other room. The two spirit wolf brothers followed suit, with their pants looking suspiciously stuffed with gold and treasures. Not without those swords, Senji said stubbornly. He approached the ghost defiantly. The ghost wore what looked like ancient battle armor and pulled his own sword out. Senji drew his swords, walking closer, repeating the last hint. Uphold the honor of the assassin. Uphold the honor of the assassin. Uphold the honor of the assassin. As he took a step up to meet the ghost, he thought back to the story of the three kings, what the assassin had done for a boy he had just met on a journey. He had sacrificed everything. With a start, Senji knew what he had to do. He stopped in his tracks, prayed that he was right, and plunged his swords into his stomach. Senji! Naruto screamed, rushing forward. An impenetrable but invisible barrier sprung up between Naruto, Nagi and Senji, keeping his friends away while the ghost stepped in front of Senji. The ghost sheathed his sword and pulled Senji's sword out of his body. Touching the wound, he looked kindly at the fallen warrior. Dangsanai and Al Yangwanganida. Dangsanun Gakugeista. The wound closed up and Senji coughed. The ghost stood up and motioned for the swords. They appeared in his hands and he bowed to Senji. Senji stood and grasped the swords, feeling the power within them. He bowed back to the ghost, who smiled and dissipated. The trembling in the room stopped. A statue that looked exactly like the ghost on the far side of the room shifted slightly, showing a stairwell that led up. Guys! Senji turned and grinned. I did it! Naruto and Nagi ran over and gripped his shoulders, grinning. They then looked at each other and decked him, knocking him on his ass. Don't you ever do something so stupid again! Naruto shouted at Senji. Fool! Nagi chimed in. They helped the shaken Senji to his feet, then hugged him. They turned to see the vast treasure around them. 50% for Suna, 25% for the Spirit Wolf clan. Leaves 25% for us, Nagi said. Naruto nodded. This should help our village out a lot as we're new. Senji grinned, clutching his new swords, staring at the ornate markings that ran the length of the blades. They practically sang to him, happy to have a new owner. Konoha, Shikamaru looked at his friends. Shino, Kiba, Ino, Chirji, Hinata. He breathed in deep. As of now, there was no going back. You know what to do. Hinata, Ino, thank you for what you're doing, and what you will be doing. Your part is more dangerous than ours will be, Shikamaru said gratefully. Hinata and Ino nodded. They all fell silent. Be extremely subtle, even to the point of formlessness. Be extremely mysterious, even to the point of soundlessness. Thereby you can be the director of the opponent's fate, Shikamaru said quietly. We are ninja of the leaf. We will not be seen, we will not be heard. We are in control of our own destiny. They left the room, heading for their positions. The guard for the Konoha dungeon settled in. He had just taken over for his compatriot. It was midnight and there was no moon tonight. He shrugged and stretched. Another boring night of guard duty. He bent down to pick up his backpack and found himself unable to stop. His head crashed directly into the ground, rendering him unconscious. Shikamaru released the shadow hold on the man. He nodded to Shino, who without breaking cover let his bugs swarm the lock, forcing it to click open. The bugs disappeared, finding their way in the darkness back to Shino. Hinata came in over the radios they had on their heads. The door is open, I can see inside now. 4 chakra signatures between you and Asuma. 1 on this floor, 3 below, clustered together. Thanks, Mama Bear, Kiba said, snickering lightly. Code names were necessary, but he couldn't help himself, despite the situation. Kiba and Shuji stayed outside while Ino, Shino, and Shikamaru entered the dungeon. They went down the corridor slowly. Around the corner. Hinata's voice came in over the earpiece. Shikamaru snaked his shadow around the corner, grabbing the man. He made the man run into the wall, hard. He passed out immediately. The 3 of them walked around the corner, over the man. They spied the stairwell, and descended. There's a desk, 1 sitting, 2 standing around to a side. 1 is smoking, Hinata said. Ino pulled on an ANBU mask, allowing only her eyes to be seen. Pulling the cloak around her and the hood up, she walked around the corridor. She approached the guards without them making much note of her presence. After all, she was ANBU, they were ANBU, and this was deep within a high-security prison. Shino's bugs grabbed the one on the right, Shikamaru's shadow, the one on the left. Ino caught the eyes of the one sitting down, and she slipped into his mind, wiping it. It was a nasty trick, one that she had been taught to never use except in battle. By accident, any member of her clan could wipe someone's mind. But they were more geared towards information gathering. The man lolled back in his chair, drooling, nothing more than a vegetable now. Shikamaru has his guard muffle the other guard's screams with his hand, while the bugs drained his chakra, rendering him unconscious. Then he forced him to knock himself out with a staff. It took 2 hits, his head was hard. Ino grabbed the keys from the belt of the guard sitting at his desk and tossed them to Shikamaru. He caught them mid-stride and went straight for Asuma's cell. He opened it to see his sensei on the floor, propped weakly against the wall. Bruises and matted blood adorned his face. Shikamaru cursed and walked over, grabbing one arm and lifting Asuma to his feet bodily. Asuma looked at Shikamaru through his swollen eyes and grunted. As they walked out, Asuma pointed at the cell door opposite. Anko. Shikamaru adjusted his plan slightly, which he always allowed for, and nodded to Ino to open Anko's cell. She, however, was in no better condition. She was unclothed, spread-eagled, suspended in the air upside down with her arms bound by chains to the near side of the room, and her legs to the far side of the room. Her back was adorned with welts and cuts, blood dripping freely down onto the floor. Puddles of it had congealed. Ino bit back her curse and motioned Shino over. He too seemed shaken, but he directed his bugs to eat through her chains. They swarmed the chains around her ankles and wrists. Ino positioned herself to catch Anko and did when the bugs succeeded. Anko was not conscious at all. Ino put her on her back and bent forward, pumping chakra to her legs to carry the weight. With a nod to Shikamaru, they raced as fast as they could out of the dungeon. Once outside, they felt the cold night air hit them with a blast. Chuji and Kiba nodded at them and took point as they raced down the street, heading for the west gate. It took a full minute. As they approached, Chuji saw the normal 2 guards on that gate standing in the middle of the road facing away from them. Looking for danger from the outside, not from within. Silently he transformed into his meat tank and began to roll. Kiba performed a Getsuga on Chuji from behind, sending him flying at impossible speeds towards the guards. They never saw it coming. He impacted them with so much force that they were unconscious before they hit the ground. All of this was done with only the sound of flesh hitting flesh. Not a scream, not a shout went up. Nothing to raise an alarm. Ino, trade Anko to Shino. Shikamaru ordered. Thanks for your help, now get back home and remember you know nothing. When you are questioned, and you were asleep. Fix your memories. Ino nodded. Of course, with her sensei broken out of jail and her teammates missing, she will be questioned. But her father would not allow her to be held without proof. He did have some clout on the council, and once she cleaned up her memories of tonight a little bit, there would be nothing to link her. Hinata likewise removed her headset and walked calmly back home. As far as anyone knew, the heiress was fast asleep in her room. And that was what the Hyuga clan would attest to. Shikamaru watched Ino leave and then nodded to the others. Let's get to the Forest of Death as fast as we can. We have until morning, maybe, before the escape is discovered. I want us well hidden before that. There are a few old underground bunkers we will be staying in. My family does the caretaking for those grounds and no one else but my father, and I know that they are there. With one last heave of Asuma onto his back, Shikamaru took off, with Shino carrying Anko, Chuji and Kiba following. Naruto's army had officially gone rogue. Chapter 20 Paths, Tengaku. Inari threw the shuriken at the target for the 100th time, his fingers releasing the weapon at the perfect apex of his swing, spinning it with a flick towards the closest he had come to dead center so far today. He glanced towards the other students in this section of the training field. There were maybe 10, 11 other students who had gotten this far in the chambers. It had been a grueling couple of months, but Inari had, with fierce determination, kept pace with the top students in the academy. Tenchi had remarked to him once that his resolve was second to only one student he had ever had. Inari smiled at that thought, bringing another shuriken to his palm, ready to strike. His goal was to be a ninja like Naruto was, and he was well on his way. Today was special. He looked around again at the other students, and saw it, the thoughtfulness in their eyes. Today the decision had to be made. Inari himself thought he knew which way he wanted to go, but maybe after the demonstrations today. Tenchi walked over to his top 12 students, having watched them practice with targets for the past hour. Gather round, he said quietly. As when they stopped training and formed a line in front of their sensei. He appraised each one of them, looking into their eyes one at a time. Today you will decide which martial art path you will walk down. At the start of the program, we told you that we have many different styles here. The way of the ninja, the way of the samurai, the art of lucha libre, Mabry's style of street fighting. He paused at the excited chatter of some of the students. Now I asked you to research these styles in the library, as well as any other, and I repeat, any other style that you might be interested in. Even if we do not have a teacher here who can be your sensei, we might be able to find you one. Both myself and Mabry have an extensive network of connections and friends. First though, we are going to have a series of display matches to show the strengths of each style so you can fully understand. Head on over to the practice field on the other side of the tower. I've gathered all the other students there as well for this demonstration. Hi sensei! They all shouted as one, and turned to go in that direction. You ready for this? Jiraiya asked. He had requested several of Naruto's clones to come assist with this demonstration. All of the students had gathered on some temporary bleachers that Guerrera had constructed. They hadn't realized that the entire village would come out. There was very little by way of entertainment here in Tengaku, Jiraiya thought wistfully. So he supposed a martial arts demonstration would be something out of the ordinary for the small populace that they had. The Naruto clones nodded with large identical grins plastered on their faces. Mabry acted as the announcer for the demonstration. Citizens and students of Tengaku, welcome to this important rite of passage for our top students. The day that they choose their fighting style. To that end we have several demonstrations for you today. First up, Jiraiya will demonstrate ninjutsu. Mabry nodded and got out of the way. The first Naruto clone entered the center of the field and faced Jiraiya, who smiled at the boy and charged. A flurry of kicks and punches, which Naruto was hard-pressed to block and avoid. As a clone he was more fragile than a normal opponent, but that would suit their purposes here just fine. Jiraiya wasn't world-renowned for no reason. Within a few seconds he landed a punch to Naruto's gut that exploded him into a puff of smoke. This was greeted by applause from the gathered crowd. Jiraiya smiled and waved at the crowd, enjoying the attention. Mabry chuckled and spoke loudly. Ninjutsu is the most famous of the Eastern martial arts. Although in most territories, it is broken into 3 general separate categories. Taijutsu, which is hand-to-hand combat, ninjutsu, which are special chakra attacks, and genjutsu, which are illusionary attacks. Jiraiya, the famous Toad Sage, who is a master of all 3, displayed for us what was a demonstration of taijutsu. With a nod to Jiraiya, a squad of 5 Naruto clones charged. Jiraiya made only a single hand seal before he spit out a lake of oil, which trapped them. He then launched himself into the air, arching his neck and then snapping forward, spat out fireballs at each Naruto clone. It was a flashy move meant to showcase the chakra attacks more than anything else. Each clone disappeared with a puff of smoke. There are also some other, rarer techniques, such as the ability to summon animals or objects that you forge a contract with. Jiraiya has the contract with toads, which I think you all already know. Thank you for the demonstration, Jiraiya. The crowd gathered was very appreciative and cheered wildly as Jiraiya walked off the field. The students were all smiles looking on, some of them even more sure of their choice now. Next up, we have Guerrera. We all know the friendly and kind-hearted mason and blacksmith. His combat skills lie in lucha libre, a grappling and wrestling art. What many of you don't know is that he defeated our very own Naruto in a kumite a little over a year ago with those skills, so don't dismiss this fighting form. Guerrera cracked his neck muscles and looked intently at the Naruto clones standing before him. He could see the same energy as he did in that match a year ago, but something was different. This Naruto was not just energetic, he was confident. The Naruto clone ran towards Guerrera, who also ran towards him. He wondered at the strategy as it was just a clone and would burst upon impact. As he thought, they collided in a puff of smoke. What he didn't expect though was the fist that suddenly clipped his chin. His head snapped back at the impact. It was a good punch. He looked down to see a Naruto clone leaping into the air in front of him. Guerrera realized that Naruto must have come from under the ground, right where he had impacted with the other clone. They used a puff of smoke to hide the attack. Clever, he thought as he grabbed the Naruto in midair. The crowd gasped as Guerrera turned and twisted Naruto, then leapt with him in a bear lock into the air. It was a perfect arc as they came sailing back to the earth, Naruto's head slightly higher than Guerrera's as he held him from behind. It was a move that would kill any man. It puffed the clone into oblivion. 2 more clones rushed Guerrera. The giant man's leap flipped over the first one as he heel kicked the second. He landed on his back, flipped over and swept his legs to take the first Naruto off his feet. Naruto leapt over that attack and came down in an axe kick to Guerrera's head. Guerrera caught the foot and twisted, pulling it towards his face but pushing with his own legs against Naruto's body. It was a perfect arm lock, except Guerrera was not going for a tap out. With a twist he pulled the arm out of the socket with a crack and the clone exploded into smoke. It was a brutality he would use in a life or death fight, and he wanted the students to see what was possible. The crowd cheered again as he got up, the applause coming from some of the students showing that his point had been made. More of Naruto's clones grinned though and rushed the giant. As the fight continued, Ali and Yoshi walked over to where Mabry, Tenchi and Jiraiya were watching. Old Man Tora was also looking on at the fight with glee in his eyes at each punch. Tsunade hadn't bothered to come, busy with something at the hospital. "Why have you not asked my clan to demonstrate?" Ali asked, clearly upset. His eyes flashed dangerously from one man to the next. Mabry looked at him and shrugged, pointing at Jiraiya. "We didn't think your clan would teach your martial art to outsiders," he said. Ali sniffed. "We will not. But that does not mean that we would shy away from a demonstration." He turned to look at the crowd. "Besides, who's to say if anyone wants to join our clan? We'd certainly consider any interested parties." Jiraiya smiled, nodded. Ali huffed up and turned to watch as Guerrera dove and clotheslined 2 Narutos at once in a move that would certainly remove an enemy's head, if he wasn't a clone. "I, Yoshi, would certainly like to demonstrate my style as well," Yoshi said, then looked confused at his own words, then smiled at himself. Tenchi was a little taken aback, but asked anyway. "What fighting style do you know, Yoshi?" We never knew you could fight." Yoshi looked at him and nodded vigorously. Yes, I will fight, thanks for asking." "But what's your style, Yoshi?" Tenchi asked again, but Yoshi was preoccupied taking notes of the battle with Guerrera and the last of Naruto clones. A few seconds later, and a series of smoke puffs, it was over. The crowd cheered relentlessly at the display. Naruto's clones didn't use any chakra attacks, preferring to keep it a taijutsu battle, so Guerrera had the advantage even though he was outnumbered. "Thank you, Guerrera, for that spirited display!" Mabry shouted to applause. "Now since the Naruto clones assigned for this battle were all destroyed, Tenchi our samurai will fight Ali, the leader of our Spirit Wolf Guild and master of Kalaripeatu." The 2 men walked into the field and drew their swords. Tenchi a traditional, but ornate samurai sword, Ali his Yurumi. The crowd was dead silent. Several heartbeats went by, then it began in a clash of steel. Tenchi stabbed forward only to be batted away by Ali, whose Yurumi curved around the sword, edging towards Tenchi's handguard. Tenchi spun and stepped right, the attack missing him by inches. He swung his sword parallel to the ground, low, in an attack that would remove a lesser man's legs. Ali leapt over it, and reached out with his own sword, snaking it towards Tenchi's chest in a corkscrew attack. Tenchi bent backwards at the waist and slapped it away with the broadside of his sword. Ali landed and pulled back for another attack. Tenchi snapped back up straight and sheathed his sword in one fluid motion. His right shoulder leaned towards Ali, and his left leg pushed backwards into the soil. Ali's eyes grew wide. A sword-drawing Batajutsu in the middle of a fight? He stretched his sword in an arc towards Tenchi's head, but knew a second later that was a mistake. Tenchi launched forward impossibly fast, drawing his sword mid-stride, his forward motion adding momentum and speed to the draw. The resulting attack would have been devastating, but Ali drew his small dagger with his left hand and blocked the attack at the last second. The dagger shattered a second later, but by then Ali had moved fully out of the way and Tenchi had passed him already. With a sigh while shaking out the numbness of his hand, he looked at Tenchi's eyes, which were serious, yet not menacing. "You know, if that had connected you would have taken my head," Ali said quietly. Tenchi shrugged. "If you were fighting at full speed instead of keeping your true power secret from all of us, I doubt I'd have gotten even this close." With a wink though, he added, "Maybe." Ali laughed loudly. "One day we should have a full-out battle. One swordsman to another." Tenchi grinned and nodded. "Deal." Mabry's voice announcing the end of the display brought cheers from the crowd. The 2 combatants walked off the field. Mabry turned to Yoshi. "You ready, Yoshi? To go up against me?" Yoshi smiled and nodded. He slowly unbuttoned his shirt and shrugged off his lab coat. Those close enough to see were stunned. Under his clothes, Yoshi was rippling, lean muscle. Not an ounce of fat existed on the man's body. Various scars adorned his flesh, some were probably from lab experiments, but most were definitely from blades. He stretched and walked out into the middle of the field, waiting on a stunned Mabry. Mabry cleared his throat and announced, "The last match today is myself, the magnificent Milford Mabry, and my street fighting style, against Yoshi." The crowd cheered and laughed simultaneously. They all knew Yoshi. To think the man could fight was, well, preposterous. Wasn't it? But the lean, hard-looking man in the middle of the field certainly appeared different from the Yoshi they all knew. Mabry looked at the man before him and knew, instantly, that this was not going to be a piece of cake. Yoshi then smiled up at him. "I left the bottle simmering, let's get on with it, yes." Yoshi struck first, an impossible kick, right at Mabry's head. Mabry blocked it with his left forearm. He snapped his fist forward in a straight punch, but Yoshi wasn't there anymore. He had sidestepped, and pulling his leg back kicked out and hit Mabry in the ribs. Yoshi brought his leg back, foot straight up in the air, balancing on one leg looking on as Mabry stumbled back from the blow. "Shit, Savat," Jiraiya mumbled. "Mabry's in for a hell of a time." Tenchi nodded. That particular style was meant to keep some distance between the opponents, while Mabry was a close combat street fighter. But Savat was also a type of street fighting, so he personally didn't think it would be that unbalanced a contest. Mabry had the size and reach on Yoshi. The man who had once fought the third Hokage to a standstill took the attacks from the smaller Yoshi, but he felt every kick. Yoshi may have been small, but his hits had major power behind them. Mabry suddenly rolled towards Yoshi and came up in an uppercut, catching Yoshi off guard. He flew backwards. Many thought the fight was over, but Yoshi flipped in midair and landed on his feet. He seemed to be happy to taste the blood in his mouth. A feral grin spread across his face. Keeping low, he burst forward, his legs coming over in a crescent kick. Mabry crossed his forearms overhead to block and felt his feet sink into the ground slightly from the impact. Yoshi bent at the waist, grabbing Mabry's shirt. In one fluid motion he arced his legs, bringing them around and in between the two of them. He kicked out and twisted backwards, sending Mabry stumbling backwards. Yoshi landed on his feet and lunged forward faster than a heartbeat. Mabry was on the defensive, the flurry of high kicks becoming faster than most of the spectators could see. The crowd cheered at the onslaught, the high level of skills that both men were displaying. Mabry finally decided he'd had enough of being on the defensive. He allowed a solid kick to his abdomen to land, taking the hit. He grabbed Yoshi's ankle and pulled him off balance, his fists raced towards Yoshi's face. An alarm went off and Yoshi dodged, standing up straight. It's ready, gotta go, nice fight. Statistically though, your guard is consistently lower on the left side, so you should raise it 3 inches. See you at dinner." He ran off to his lab, leaving everyone speechless, but not all that surprised. Mabry rolled his head back in out loud roaring laughter. "Ladies and gentlemen, that concludes our demonstration. Thank you for coming out." The crowd cheered appreciatively and began to disperse. Tenchi smiled and walked up to his top students. "Okay, so you've seen what we have to offer. Let's talk about your choices now. Konoha, Forest of Death, how is he?" Chuji asked Shikamaru. The candles they had lit in the room flickered as if in response to the mood in the room. It had been 2 days since the rescue, and their situation, while tenuous, seemed to be settling down, at least somewhat. The ANBU en route had searched the area above their bunker the day before. A very thorough search according to Shino. His bugs had monitored the activity discreetly. The entrance to this facility was hidden perfectly. An extremely low-powered seal camouflaged the door as just another rock in the middle of a river. Any scents were washed away by the water, and the power of the seal couldn't be detected from the shore. Konoha had forgotten this place's existence generations ago. However, Shikamaru's family had been in charge of the grounds for those generations, and so had not forgotten. Of course, those that knew now were just Shikamaru himself and his father. "His fever broke, just resting now," he told Shuji. Both Asuma and Enko lay on cots, blankets over them. Enko was covered in the injury cream that Hinata had given Shikamaru before the rescue to use on Asuma. It was clear the moment they were safely hidden that Enko needed it more. Her body battered and bruised to an extent that shocked them all. Her pallor suggested major blood loss and dehydration. Grimly, Shikamaru realized she could die at any moment. It was only her will to live that kept her broken body functioning. Asuma was better off. He was beaten, but hadn't suffered the abuses that Anko had. Apparently Danzo held a hatred for Anko as the former apprentice of Orochimaru. They had both been unconscious since they arrived. Shikamaru sighed and stood up from his position kneeling beside Asuma's bed. The plan he had put together had them staying here for months, using the bunker as a base of operations to perform guerrilla tactics against Danzo, and plot an assassination. Asuma would probably be alright without medical assistance. But Anko... Shino... Kiba... He called out across the bunker. The bug user walked over, a map of Konoha in his hand, while the dog clan boy just tilted his head slightly towards them, not leaving his guard post near the entrance, but paying attention nonetheless. We need to get Anko to a doctor. A really good one, Shikamaru said somberly. She does not seem to be getting better. Shino nodded. That's correct. Her fever has not broken and her breathing seems even shallower. If this rate of decline continues, she could have days, maybe at most a week to live. Kiba grunted. There isn't a doctor in Konoha that we can trust to treat her. So where does that leave us? Shikamaru frowned. The closest friendly village would be Suna. Friendly? Chuji asked incredulously. As friendly as we're going to get within 100 miles. Shikamaru said matter-of-factly. We have to hope that they will help. They helped in the Sasuke retrieval. The Kazekage there considers Naruto a friend. Maybe things haven't gotten so bad that we can't turn to them for medical assistance. It's the only chance Anko has. How? Kiba asked quietly. They all turned to look at him, the sadness in his voice. At full speed, me and Akamaru could probably get there in 3 days. But by the time we find a medic who's willing to help in return, Anko could die. And we can't move her either. Shino chimed in. It's a miracle she survived the escape. Shikamaru sighed. Kiba, you will need to move faster than you ever have before. If we assume she has 1 week left, and we can't say for sure because none of us are medics, then the latest you can return is 7 days from now, probably 6. Giving you 3 days to get there, a half a day to find a medic, and another 3 days to get back with them. I surmise the medic would not be able to move as quickly as you can. Also factoring in the need to avoid route and ANBU patrols. Shikamaru concluded. Kiba grunted in exasperation and cracked his neck, walking over to the group. Shino automatically shifted close to the entrance, taking over as guard. Well, if one of us can do it, it would have to be me, he said. Akamaru quietly yelped from on top Kiba's head. Us. Kiba agreed with a small smile. He pulled out a small compass and compared it to the map on the wall. The only way will be a straight line. I'll have to rely on speed to avoid the ANBU. As little rest as I can manage, probably popping soldier pills along the way. Shikamaru nodded in agreement. It bothered him. This was barely a plan. It was desperation. Good luck, he said to Kiba grimly. Kiba scoffed. Luck? Ninja rely on skill. See you in a week. He looked to Shino, who cocked his head. My bugs say the way is clear at least 500 yards in every direction. Beyond that I do not know, Shino said stoically. Kiba nodded and with a breath he and Akamaru vanished through the entrance. Konoha, Hokage's tower. Danzo's fist slammed into the desk. How can there not be any trace? Spittle formed on his lips, his unbound eye bulging in its socket. The search for the escaped prisoners and their rescuers had been futile. They had vanished like ghosts in the night. Or more appropriately, a fart in the wind. The root member in front of him remained emotionless. His 2 compatriots were similarly stoic. Off to the side was Ino and a few ANBU officers. Ino was there in her capacity as a mind reader for the Hokage. The plan Shikamaru had made months ago to move her into this position had been successful. Danzo did not trust anyone, and clearly felt that she was inferior enough to him as to not pose a threat. Ino was furious at being dismissed, but glad the plan had worked. Now she had access to the inner workings of this office, even if it did mean she had to be more careful. There was a faint scent near the Forest of Death training grounds, but it proved to be a phantom trail. They have made their escape completely, the root member said in a deadpan manner. Danzo furiously threw a kunai and embedded it in the left eye of the messenger. The man slumped to the ground to the shock of the ANBU present, and Ino. The other root members gave no indication that they'd even noticed. Danzo swore violently. Too many think they can escape this village. Our borders are closed, but perhaps another public demonstration is in order. This time nothing will deter the example from being made. He nodded to the ANBU next to Ino. They went outside and retrieved a Konoha nin whose hands had been bound. With a start, Ino recognized her old teacher Irika, sensei. His face was bloodied and his hideout had been removed. You will pay for this, Danzo. Somehow you will pay. Irika spat out. Ino did her best to remain emotionless as her mind raced. Fool, Danzo said, reaching across the Hokage's desk to backhand Irika. You think to stand against me? To teach the academy's students to rebel against me? Irika spat blood onto the floor. You're a tyrant, Danzo. And tyrants always meet a gruesome end. Danzo laughed. In 1 week we shall see who meets a gruesome end. You will be executed on the steps of this tower for your blasphemy 1 week from today. I am your emperor, your leader, your Hokage. I will not be defied. It was Irika's turn to laugh. You will be reviled, not just defied. Kill me as you wish, you coward. You will pay for your crimes soon enough. Danzo waved his hand, dismissing them all. That's some tongue you have there, Irika. He sneered. Remove it for him, he told the last root member as he was leaving. Sunagakure, 3 days later. The noise was deafening in the Kazekage's office. The argument between the two Spirit Wolf clan members and Kankuro over the division of treasure, the retelling of Nagi's and Senji's trials in the cave, the questions over the 2 immaculate swords. Finally, Gaara couldn't take the noise anymore. Silence! He shouted, his voice booming in the stone-walled office. Everyone grew quiet. I am glad you all made it back. And the treasure you found is truly amazing. Our curators will have their work cut out for them. He then glared at Kankuro and the Spirit Wolf brothers. Take your bickering outside to decide which treasures are kept by whom. I care not. Unless you find something that looks important to Sunagakure heritage, of course, Kankuro, Gaara said matter-of-factly. The 3 men walked outside and their muffled voices could be heard through the heavy oak door. Random gold coins had fallen out of the shoes of one of the brothers, prompting another tirade from Kankuro on fair dealings. Gaara sighed and turned to Naruto. So your treasure hunt was a success in more ways than one. He stared intently at the swords in Senji's hands. Senji was cradling them like newborn babies. Now that they all had a chance to really look at them, they were beautiful. Slightly shorter than normal katana, the twin kodachi were gleaming in the sunlight. The scabbards were black, inlaid with gold and jade. The hilts were tightly wound silk with jade stoppers in the handles. They would be at home decorating any member of royalty's mantle. However, the most surprising thing was the blades. They were black as night and sharp as if newly forged. Yet they seemed to have a glow, almost imperceptible to the human eye. Those are magnificent, Temari said quietly. Senji beamed with pride. Yes, they are. Naruto looked at his friends. This was a good trip. Senji found what he came for, and we are leaving with some profit. I am sorry about the ninja who died, though. Gaara nodded. They were ninja of Suna. They died as they lived, serving our village. Their families will be taken care of, I assure you. Good, I'm glad, Naruto said. Now I need to talk to you about something, Gaara. His voice suddenly getting very serious. All conversation in the room stopped, and eyes turned towards Naruto curiously. My friends have been trying to keep a secret from me, not very well. I understand why they did it, thinking I'd be confused or rush off, Naruto said plainly. Senji and Nagi were startled. The only thing they were keeping from Naruto was, I heard about the expansion of Konoha. The defeat of IWA. The massacre at Death Valley, Naruto said, his eyes gone cold. My village may be on the other side of the world, but people talk, and I have so many clones all over that I was bound to hear about it sooner or later. Naruto, Nagi began. Naruto held up his hand. It's okay. It's my old village, and everyone thought I'd rush off to try to, well, do something, I guess. Honestly, I'm not sure what I could or would do. Danzo is in charge, and the village went to war. It's not what the old man wanted for his village, but he's gone and other people are running the show now. Naruto shrugged. It's got nothing to do with me. My village is all the way on the other side of the world now. My life is not in Konoha anymore. He turned to Gaara. However, you are my friend. Your family, he said, turning to Temari, are my friends. So if you need help or anything, contact me, and I will come running. Someone who abandons his friends is less than trash. Gaara nodded at him. We too had decided not to broach the subject. Our council is pushing us to fortify our defenses for when Danzo is ready to move again. We estimate that to be 2 years. He has to recoup his losses from the war with IWA, and fighting us in the desert at less than half strength would be suicide. When the time comes, Suna will stand against Danzo. We will not lose. Naruto smiled. I know you won't. My offer stands. Gaara extended his hand and Naruto plainly ignored it and hugged his friend. Gaara hugged him back, then they parted and coughed as one. If you plan to leave today, wait until sunset. It's far easier to travel in the desert at night, Gaara said. Naruto sighed and then turned to his teammates. I say we get an early dinner, and then start heading back home. It's almost evening. Who says ramen? Later that evening, Naruto, Senji, and Nagi watched as the Spirit Wolf clan members walked next to the camels they had bought. The camels themselves looked distraught at the weight that was in high bags on their backs. For camels, more than a few million in gold and jewels. Even with Suna taking half, and the Spirit Wolf brothers there taking the other half, Tengaku will have enough money to run for a year. Senji said out loud. Naruto nodded thoughtfully. When we get back, I'll ask Tenchi-sensei to teach me about the finances. How do we spend money to run a village? I can think of some basic ideas. Salaries for our warriors, food. But there probably is a lot more that I don't know. Nagi and Senji smiled. Naruto sure was taking his role as village leader seriously. The two of them had apologized profusely for not telling him about Konoha when they heard about it back in Tengaku from shopkeepers. The general consensus had been that Naruto needed to be protected. The two Spirit Wolf clan members muttered as they grew closer about the negotiating tactics of a certain puppet user. Kankuro had followed Gaara's orders and made sure the priceless artifacts were kept in Sunagakure. He'd also tied up one of the brothers and threatened to keep him as part of the 50% deal if they didn't stop giving him so much trouble. Hey Naruto! Nagi called his attention. He pointed towards the sunset. Do you guys see that? They all turned and looked. A small black dot was approaching very, very fast over the sand dunes. As they watched, within a minute it looked like it had traveled more than a mile. It's a ninja, Senji said negligibly. Probably a Suna messenger or something. It's coming from the east, we need to head west, so we should probably get going. He started to walk off and the Spirit Wolf brothers followed suit. Wait, Naruto said. There's something about that ninja. He didn't move from his spot, watching intently as the dot became an outline. It took a few more seconds before Naruto could make out the full shape of the body. Kiba! He exclaimed. They all saw as the boy became more visible and were shocked. He was racing at full speed, his dog in his arms. Blood streamed freely from a cut on his shoulder behind him. His face showing signs of strain, then shock and recognition as he saw Naruto. He stopped just shy of running into Naruto seconds later and collapsed to one knee. Nah, Naruto? He managed to squeeze out between gasps of breath. Kiba! Naruto said and hugged the boy, one of his friends from Konoha. What, did you run all the way here from Konoha? Kiba nodded and fell back to both knees. Senji sprang forward with a water bottle which Kiba drank hungrily. He stopped and offered the rest to Akamaru, pouring it down the puppy's throat. Naruto, what are you doing here? Kiba asked incredulously. Of all the people he expected or hoped to see, Naruto hadn't even crossed his mind. Never mind that, what's wrong? Naruto asked seriously, seeing the wound and the fatigue on his friend. I need to find a doctor. We rescued Anko from Danzo's dungeon, but she is not regaining consciousness. We think she's dying, Kiba said. Naruto's eyes grew hard. Dying? What did Danzo do to her? Kiba shook his head. Unimaginable things, I can't say. I don't want to. I'm sorry Naruto, but I need to find a doctor. We'll catch up some other time. Kiba made to get up but his legs had cramped and he needed to pause to rub them. Hold on Kiba, Naruto said reaching out for him. Senji, fast as you can find Gaara and tell him we need a medic here, in 5 minutes. Senji nodded and disappeared with his signature quick step. Naruto formed 10 clones in a puff of smoke. He turned to the Spirit Wolf brothers. Tengaku needs that delivery. My clones will help you get it there. The brothers looked at him, and the one on the left, Rashid, spoke up. If it's a fight you're headed for, the Spirit Wolf clan does not run away. Naruto shook his head. No, Tengaku does need that money to reach the village safely. That's your responsibility right now. They looked at Naruto carefully, then nodded in acquiescence, and turned to head west. It would be a month-long trip back to the mountains. Kiba looked confused as Naruto ordered people around. He stared at Naruto carefully, and saw changes. Aside from the loss of his hideous orange clothes and some very nice new white ones, this Naruto seemed serious. A bit harder even. Kiba had recognized that same look in most of his friends. That was the look of someone who's seen battle and people die. But had Naruto been through what he and his friends been through? Kiba had a lot of questions and no time to ask them. We need to travel fast. Shino, Shikamaru and Chuji are in a secret place. The ANBU saw me running from a distance, and a long-range shuriken nicked me as I ran. They never catch up to me from that distance, he said proudly. Naruto nodded. A second later, Senjai, Gaara, Kankuro, Temari and Baki appeared with another Sunanin who Naruto assumed was the medic. Naruto, Gaara began. I thought you said mere hours ago that this wasn't your fight. Naruto smiled and shrugged. Still isn't. But I can't abandon my friends. He made 4 more clones. Each one went behind Nagi, Senjai and the medic Nin clutching a bag. Now the fastest way I can think of to get there is to Hiraishin over and over again. You guys can't keep up if I do that, well except for you Senjai. Naruto didn't let Senjai interrupt. But when we reach I'm going to be exhausted and we might meet some resistance. So you guys would have to fight. Nagi and Senjai nodded at the logic of it. Kiba grumbled. I can keep up with whatever speed you go at Baka. Shikamaru and the others are hidden in the Forest of Death. I'll show you where when we get in the forest, but we need to get past the ANBU patrols. Naruto looked at Kiba for a second then laughed. You have no idea how long it's been since someone called me that. He grinned. Gosh, I miss you guys. Let's go. His clones let Senjai and Nagi clamber onto their backs in a piggyback style. The Sand siblings looked on in amazement and slight discomfort at the sight. It was unsettling. Kiba protested but was scooped up in one of the Naruto clones' arms. With a final nod, they disappeared in white flashes. Gaara and his siblings saw them reappear for a second a mile away to the east only to disappear again. How is he doing that? Temari asked in wonder. I've read about the Hiraishin. Doesn't he need to have a seal to teleport to? Gaara shook his head. When he told me about his training, he said Jiraiya emphasized visualizing your target. He realized that he could jump anywhere by picturing the seal there. So he can go as far as he can see clearly. That's not the Hiraishin then, it's something else, something new, Temari exclaimed. That's insane, Kankuro said. That's Naruto, Gaara replied. Kiba was astounded. They were popping into and out of existence at a ridiculous speed. It was like blinking. Blink sand dune. Blink rocks. Blink sand dune. Blink, edge of the desert. If he wasn't part of it, he'd have thought it was impossible. The distance Naruto was covering in seconds, not hours, was incredible. Still, Kiba wondered how long he could keep this up. He estimated it would still take a couple hours to get there. Could Naruto keep up this Hiraishin, as he called it, for that long? He hoped they made it back in time. Anko really didn't look good when he'd left. It took them just under 24 hours to reach the Forest of Death. It was pitch black, a quarter moon in the night sky. They'd been moving so fast that they hadn't seen any patrols. Naruto had to slow down when he reached a forested area because he couldn't see that far ahead, but they still appeared and disappeared faster than anyone could follow. Soon they were at the edge of the Forest of Death and Naruto stopped. The clone holding Kiba puffed into smoke, too exhausted to continue. The others looked like they were about to as well. Naruto himself fell to one knee panting. This wasn't as bad as when Tenchi had made him move those rocks all day using the Hiraishin, but it had been a while since he'd done it. Senjai, Nagi and the medic Nin clambered off of the Naruto clones who all puffed out of existence. The medic Nin's face was pale. That anyone see could do something like that, he stammered out. Maybe the 4th Hokage. Naruto stood up and bent at the waist, resting his hands on his knees. Yeah, that was my dad. This isn't the same, but it's all I got for now. He blew out a tired sigh heavily. Kiba stood rooted to the spot. The fourth was Naruto's dad? What? How was that secret kept from everyone? He'd never have been run out of the village if people knew that. Kiba shook his head to clear it. Not now. Now we need to get to Anko. There. He pointed. We follow that stream. It becomes a river a couple of miles in, and there's a special entrance. He moved forward, but then froze in place, sniffing the air. Akamaru growled. Kiba turned and threw a kunai towards a tree. It hit with a thunk. Ah! A voice whispered from behind them. Is that where you've been hiding? Danzo-sama will be pleased. A face appeared out of a tree trunk inches away from Kiba's kunai, slowly followed by the rest of the body. Kiba cursed. It was one of the rude bastards who had been prevalent since Danzo took over. Since there are so many of you, I'll just go get some backup and come back and maybe you can join the teacher for the fun tomorrow. He giggled perversely and shunshined in a swirl of leaves. Before he could finish the shunhin, though, Senjai was behind him and impaled the ghostly image that existed mid-shunshin with his twin Kodachi. The man flickered back into existence before them, the Kodachi sticking through his stomach. He gurgled in disbelief. Wah! He died on the blades, slipping off them into the soft ground. Nagi walked over to the body. I'll hide it. He grabbed a foot and dragged it into the large shadow of an oak tree. He sank into the shadows, pulling the body down with him. He reemerged a few seconds later, without the body. Naruto nodded and looked back at the stream. Didn't know you could do that, Nagi, creepy. They jumped into the water and headed downstream as fast as they could. They're coming, Shino told the others. My bugs say Kiba brought 4 others. One is familiar. I don't know what they mean, they're buzzing with excitement. The level of chakra is like when... The entrance burst open and the first person inside was... Naruto! Chuji, Shino, and Shikamaru all exclaimed at the same time. Naruto was closely followed by Kiba, and 3 other ninja. The medic Nin took one look at the room, the 2 cots, and ran to Anko. He cursed loudly and scrambled in his bag. He pulled out instruments and syringes and began to examine Anko, injecting her with a few liquids. Naruto saw her body when the medic removed the blanket to check her. Shikamaru and the others hadn't dared move her enough to dress her, leaving her under the blankets for propriety. But now, with the blanket thrown back, Naruto and the others could see the marks. The bruises and cuts. Shikamaru had cleaned the blood off as best he could and applied the cream he had gotten from Hinata for Asuma. But it did nothing to hide the amount of damage. Naruto grew angry, seething that something like this could be allowed to happen. Shikamaru was stunned. Of all the people, he had not expected Naruto. He took in the newcomers quickly. The one with the sword stood like someone highly skilled. So did the dark-skinned one with the dreadlocks. They looked like Chunin, possibly Jounin, level ninja. Naruto, however, barely looked like his old self. This Naruto seemed positively deadly. Of course, the expression on his face at the sight of Anko may have skewed Shikamaru's insight at that moment. Naruto, it's good to see you, Shikamaru said quietly, breaking Naruto's intense concentration on the fast hands of the medic. Naruto turned to Shikamaru and smiled. It sure is. How's it been, Shika? Shikamaru was taken aback by the change. Naruto was the same Naruto after all. He just had an added intensity. We've been managing, he replied. What are you doing here? While Kiba filled in the others on how he fared, and found Naruto and his team, Naruto's mind drifted back to Anko and Asuma. Konoha was so different now. So changed by one man. Wait, Naruto interrupted. What did that root guy mean by join the teacher? Shikamaru's face paled slightly. We have a system of getting information from outside using Shino's bugs. We only found out a little while ago. They're planning to execute Irika-sensei at noon tomorrow. What? Naruto exclaimed. Why? Shikamaru sighed. The official story is that Irika was teaching the students at the academy the ways of the third still. But I surmise he needed to have a show of authority to bring any dissenters into line. He rules by fear and needs to remind people of that. Naruto paced exasperatedly. We need to rescue him. Shikamaru nodded. I agree. But Danzo may be expecting a rescue attempt. Security will be heavy. The guards will be experienced ANBU and root agents. I have a plan that now that you're here maybe can actually succeed. Naruto listened intently to Shikamaru's plan. He personally thought Shikamaru was the smartest guy he'd ever met. This plan was insane, and genius at the same time. I have some techniques that could probably improve your plan a little bit, Naruto added. But after we've done it, what will you do? What do you mean? Shikamaru asked. They saw the medic cover back up Anko and start bandaging up her shoulder where her curse mark had been sliced off the skin. Will you stay in Konoha? You could come to my village. There you'd be safe. No hiding, no plots. We're now starting up, but we've come a long way, Naruto said. Shikamaru thought quietly for a second, then shook his head. No. Konoha is our home. We have family, friends. We will defend it. We will take it back from Danzo. There are several hidden bunkers like this in the forest. All over Konoha, in fact. We will fight from here, until we can kill him and free Konoha. Nods from Shino, Kiba and Shuji greeted Shikamaru's pledge. Naruto nodded in understanding. He felt conflicted inside, but hid it as much as he could. Konoha was his first home, but he had a new one now. And Konoha had exiled him, but his friends needed help. Naruto didn't know what else to do, but he knew he could do this. He would rescue Iruka-sensei and take him back to Tengaku. Believe it! Chapter 21, Guardians, Guardians, there it is! Hikaru shouted out, pointing out the approaching island to Calamity. The two of them had been nearly inseparable since the pirate attack 2 weeks ago. That had become less frequent though, as she had needed to step up her training regimen. Calamity had seen where her skills needed to be improved. Her arrows had limited stopping power, so she had asked her teammates for help. Sakura had explained chakra theory to her, and suggested that if she infused her arrows with chakra, they'd pack a bigger punch. Kakashi had helped with the testing, and discovered that Calamity was a fire type. So she had been doing some basic chakra control exercises every day, just trying to find and form chakra. Kakashi told her it would be months or even a full year before she could push that chakra down into her weapons in any practical way. Hikaru had taken to feeding a giant tiger that the circus troupe had on board. Every day he would go down to the hold and take breakfast and dinner for the tiger, and talk to it. Calamity had overheard one of his conversations with the tiger, who just lay on his paws watching Hikaru curiously. He was talking about his mother, and how his father and mother were separated. Not wanting to intrude, Calamity left before he knew she was there. Now, however, they were all up on deck, watching the land of the moon as their ship approached it rapidly. It looks magnificent, Hiroka said breathlessly. And indeed it did. Sparkling white sandy beaches, crystal clear water, and lush forest. It certainly seemed like an island paradise. Oh, I'd love to go for a swim, Sakura said, her eyes taking in the scenery. Yosh! This is a very youthful place, Lee said, grinning broadly. We'll have time for that soon enough, Kakashi said somberly. Something is wrong though. He peered at the docks. Not a single person was out. With a large ship coming into dock, shouldn't there be vendors waiting to greet them? A welcoming committee maybe? But no, the entire place seems deserted. The three girls then focused on what Kakashi brought to their attention. The docks were indeed deserted. Silently, Sakura wished that the last of the Naruto clones hadn't popped a few days earlier. It was nice to spend time with her old teammate, even if it was just a clone, it was still him. But now, they were facing a highly probable battle situation, and Naruto had gotten very strong and his strength would be missed. She glanced over at her teammates. It's okay, we're strong too. And we've also got Kakashi and Lee. We'll handle this ourselves. With her inner assurance firmly in place, she braced herself as the ship shuddered into dock. A loud explosion echoed down to the docks. Kakashi turned to the prince and his entourage who were coming down the ramp. You should stay on the ship, Your Highness, he said, waving the entourage back. No, the prince replied firmly. My father will know what's going on. We will go to the palace. The panic in his eyes was apparent though, as a plume of smoke rose like a finger to the skies. Kakashi glanced at the girls quickly. Calamity nodded and ran to the nearest building to their left. She grabbed onto a low-hanging fire escape ladder and clambered up it, climbing her way swiftly to the rooftop. Once there, she peered towards the source of the fire. The girls had already established between themselves that she had the sharpest eyesight, so she was the natural lookout. I see a battle, she shouted down from the rooftop. I can't make out who's fighting, but it's definitely by the gates of the palace. Kakashi nodded. Stay high, he shouted back up to her. He then turned to the prince. Even if you wish to put yourself in danger, I insist you leave the young prince here. We're entering a battle zone. Michiru gulped and directed one of his servants to take Hikaru back onto the ship. Kakashi watched the boy go, thinking of their next move simultaneously. Sakura, Hiroka. Take flanking positions on either side of the prince's wagon. I will take lead 25 feet in front. Lee! I want you with the prince. Stay on that wagon. The girls nodded back at him. His lips thinned with anxiety behind his mask as he looked away towards the smoke. Be ready, he added softly. As the servant followed Hikaru onto the ship, he got distracted with the hustle and bustle of offloading the crown prince's rather extensive wardrobe. Hikaru used the commotion to slip away and back onto the dock. He snuck through the wagons as they were assembling and managed to make his way to the back of his father's wagon. No one was going to tell him what to do. He was a prince after all. The wagon train took off at a fast speed down the cobblestone street. The place really was deserted. People were clearly locked away inside their houses, obvious because Kakashi could see a window crack open every now and then as they passed. He glanced up. Calamity was doing a good job of moving from rooftop to rooftop, considering she was using pure agility and no chakra. He looked back at the other team members. Sakura looked calm and ready, so did Hiroka, as they raced alongside the wagon. Lee, however, was atop the wagon, legs apart, one in front the other, arms out for balance, grinning widely. As if in flight, he whooped. As if in flight. Kakashi grimaced and turned his focus back forward, determined not to let the similarities between his lifelong rival and his protege get to him. The distance melted away, and before they knew it, they could hear the sounds of battle. A sharp scream pierced the sky. Calamity hung back at the last tall building before the open grounds that lead to the palace. She could offer long-range support from here. She drew her large bow and notched an arrow in readiness. A bead of sweat trickled down her temple at what lay before them. Calamity saw it first as she was the highest, but Kakashi could see it as well. Hundreds of bodies. Blood everywhere. It was a true battlefield. He saw the remnants of the battle ongoing. It looked like palace guards were being attacked by military forces. Kakashi was also sure he saw at least 2 ninja in the mix. He turned back around. The battle is blocking the entrance to the palace. It doesn't make sense trying to go through. Who's the enemy? Lee asked. Who should we help? We'll see soon enough, Kakashi replied, motioning one of the prince's wagons forward. Lee, drive this wagon, and as fast as you can, follow me. He took off at great speed, running towards the battle. Lee grabbed the reins from the frightened servant and snapped the reins, lurching the carriage forward. The prince leaned out of his wagon, seeing one of his wagons careen past him. Where are you going with my shoes? He shouted. Kakashi kept a sharp eye for the reaction of the battle's combatants of the arrival of the prince's carriage. He didn't have to wait long. It's Prince Michiru. Protect the prince, the palace guard shouted. Kakashi nodded and turned his attention to the attacking military forces. They all wore the insignia of the Crescent Moon Kingdom. So either they were infiltrators or this was a palace coup attempt. Not that it mattered anymore. His first kunai cut the throat of a spear-wielding soldier. Blood spurted outwards, but Kakashi was moving at the speed he had developed to use Chidori, so was long gone before any blood could land on him. He cut a swath through the large group of soldiers who were unprepared for such a skilled attack. Lee turned and ran the wagon straight into the soldiers. He leapt off it and flipped in midair, landing feet first on someone's shoulders. The man had to have been nearly 300 pounds, so it wasn't too surprising that he kept standing. He looked up confused at a smiling Lee who looked back down at him and winked. He hit the man in his face with a flick of his nunchaku. The man shrieked as blood exploded from his nose. He stumbled backwards and Lee kept his balance on top of him. A soldier swung at Lee with a sword, but he jumped over it, flipping upside down and cracking the man's skull with his nunchaku. He landed in a handspring on the large man's head, pushing himself back up into another flip as another sword swiped at his arms this time. He flipped over and came around with a crescent kick to the attacker's head, crushing it down onto his shoulders, sending the soldier into oblivion. Lee had managed to finish his crescent kick with his left leg out in the kick, but his right leg tucked under him, still on the large soldier's head. Guy-sensei says we need to use the terrain to our advantage, Lee said to no one in particular as twirled the nunchucks. I think you count as terrain. He smacked the man on the left side of his head and he stumbled left, which is where Lee wanted to go next. Sakura and Hiroka stood ready on either side of the prince's wagon, on edge, waiting for an inevitable attack. Calamity kept an eye on the battle. Kakashi and Lee were doing well. She could have contributed, but didn't want to give away her position just yet. She glanced past the battle towards the castle itself. With a gasp, she peered harder. It looked like the king, it had to be with that crown, was actually in a battle with a ninja. The king was clearly trained in swordplay, but not by a ninja. He swung his broadsword swiftly, his thick arms twirling the massive blade as if it was a stick. The ninja, however, was having no trouble dodging the swings, and seemed to be waiting for an opening to strike. Calamity notched her arrow quickly, seeing where this was going. It all happened in the blink of an eye. The king swung and missed the ninja, who saw his chance and lunged forward with his hand glowing. Calamity let her arrow fly. It was her strongest bow, her fullest draw. The ninja had barely touched the king's shoulder before the arrow slammed its way into his forearm. The force was such that his hand snapped back out, away from the king, and made him stumble. The king fell to his knees in a howl of pain, clutching his shoulder. Calamity's view was blocked then as the king's guards made it to him and carried him away. The ninja she had hit pulled the arrow out and glared in her direction. Calamity let another arrow fly at him, aimed at his head this time. He didn't flinch, catching it in midair mere inches from his face. He snapped the arrow between two fingers and turned to look after where the king had gone. Finding no trace of the king, he snarled and glanced back in Calamity's direction before disappearing in a flash. Shit! Calamity said as she stood up. Her position was no longer safe. She looked over the edge of the building and jumped off, grasping a gutter pipe and slid down as far as she could before letting go and landing on the top of one of the prince's carriage. Sakura and Hiroka were keeping a very sharp eye out for trouble, watching Kakashi and Lee work their way through the soldiers. As much as they may have wanted to join the battle, their task was to guard the prince. They both knew it. It didn't mean they had to like it. They glanced at Calamity as she landed. I saw the king. He's been injured by a ninja, Calamity said. She was already in her mind memorizing the face of that ninja. His attack had barely grazed the king, but had clearly inflicted much damage. He would be a dangerous opponent. My father was injured? The Prince Machira shouted, sticking his head out of the carriage. Where? Calamity nodded her head towards the palace grounds. Inside the grounds. He was fighting a ninja. There seems to be 3 ninja in total that I counted. Several hundred soldiers invading the grounds. Less than 50 palace guards protecting the king. If we hadn't shown up, they would have been overrun already. We will go find my father, the prince exclaimed. He turned to the driver of his wagon. Go! Now! The nervous driver snapped the reins and the wagon lurched forward. Calamity lost her footing and fell backwards onto her ass. Hiroka swore and ran after the wagon, Sakura following. Kakashi had told them to stay put, and they were now plummeting towards a battlefield after the prince. From her vantage point behind the wagon, Sakura saw a head pop up, and used some language she'd never have used in front of anyone. The prince's son was hiding in the folds of cloth behind the coach. She sped up and jumped, gaining a foothold behind the wagon and holding onto the top. Hikaru looked up at her, frightened. Sakura shook her head in frustrating. Now they had 2 people to protect in a battle. Hiroka grabbed onto the side of the wagon and made herself as flat against it as she could. This was going to get ugly real fast. The wagon horses crashed through a group of soldiers. The large wheels rocketed side to side as they rolled over them, crushing them underneath, their shrieks filling the air. Sakura squirmed as a hand grabbed onto her ankle. She kicked it off when she realized it was a dismembered hand. The carriage broke through the ranks of the soldiers and burst into the palace grounds. It skidded sideways and one of the wheels broke. Before it could topple, Hiroka let go of the carriage and rolled to safety. The crazed horses dragged the carriage on one wheel, tottering, threatening to fall. Calamity jumped off and landed on one knee in a crouched position. Sakura grabbed Hikaru from the folds of the back of the carriage and jumped backwards. With the extra weight, her fall wasn't as clean as the others. She skidded on the grass, feeling the air knocked out of her, but maintained her hold on the frightened young prince. The wagon finally toppled, the prince inside letting out an exclamation of shock and pain. The horses tried dragging it further, but the dead weight of the carriage broke the straps harnessing them to it, and they ran away. Calamity ran over to check on Sakura and, was that Hikaru? Hiroka took a quick stock of their situation, and it was not good. Kakashi and Lee were cutting down the numbers outside the gates, but a good many soldiers had already made it inside. Plus 2 ninjas were advancing on their position. She spied maybe 10 remaining palace guards fighting as best they could to stem the tide. Her father had long drilled basic battle tactics into her head. She knew that 2 ninja were an unknown entity in the battle equation. Were they stronger than her? 2 on 1 would make life difficult. She glanced back at Calamity, who was helping Sakura and the young prince. With a whistle, she got Calamity's attention. Calamity's head snapped around and she saw the ninja advancing on Hiroka and the fallen wagon with the prince inside it who was yelling to be let out. She raced over to Hiroka, blocking the wagon. She too saw the ninja advancing. "I'll take the girl on the left," Calamity said. "Okay, the dumb-looking brute on the right is mine then." Hiroka nodded, snapping her scarf out towards the attacking ninja. Sakura grabbed the young prince and raced towards the carriage. She skidded low and stopped just shy of the roof of the overturned wagon. She put the prince down and jumped up and onto the door. Sakura opened it and saw Michiru struggling to extricate himself from the curtains and overturned seats, but otherwise unscathed. She reached for him and pushing chakra to her legs and arms pulled him out. He huffed and puffed, finally landing on the ground next to his son, who he stared at in shock. "Hikaru? What are you doing here?" Sakura interrupted them. "No time for that now. We've got to move. Let's head for the palace." She looked over at her teammates. They had engaged 2 ninja and seemed to be barely holding their own. She took a deep breath and prepared to grab the prince and his son and push them towards the palace, when an armored carriage raced around the side of the building. At least 10 palace guards rode in front and beside it. It careened to a stop right next to Sakura and the prince. The doors swung open to reveal a palace guard and a clearly in pain king. "Get in, your highness!" the guard shouted at Prince Michiru. Sakura wasted no thought and pulled at the prince and his son, shoving them into the wagon. She turned swiftly and yelled for her teammates. "Hiroka! Calamity! We're pulling out!" Calamity fired a few more arrows at the blur in front of her. Damn, this girl was fast. She jumped backwards and flipped into a one-handed handspring. On her final flip arc she fired off a couple more bolts from her crossbows, all of which missed. But it served the purpose of stalling. She landed safely next to the wagon and in one deft move got on top, already reaching for more bolts for her mini crossbows. Hiroka found herself faced with a brute of a man who seemed unaffected by her attacks. The cloth scarf snapped at him, and an attack that would shatter rock was caught. He hit her across the face, and she flew back into the ground. Sakura gasped and readied herself to leap in to save Hiroka when a green blur ran up the offending ninja's chest. His head snapped back, but he didn't go down. Sakura made out Lee's shape in midair, having connected with that kick, and doing a flip with the nunchucks in his hands. As if in slow motion, Sakura saw it all happen. Upside down and slightly behind the man, he reached out with the chain and grabbed the ninja's neck with it. Lee twisted in midair and brought his body facing the man. He bent and let gravity take him to the ground while pulling apart with the nunchucks. The large ninja's neck proved thick, but his head collided with the stone courtyard satisfyingly. Sakura heard the crack from where she was. Lee got up quickly without a second glance at the man and ran over to Hiroka, who was unconscious. Sakura shook her head at the brutality and finality of Lee's attack. The Lee she had known before wouldn't have been so callous. Time and war change a person, she told herself. Lee scooped up Sakura and dodged some arrows from the invading army that had poured into the palace grounds. Despite his and Kakashi's best efforts, there was just too many. Kakashi himself stood in a circle of dead bodies near the gate, killing anyone unfortunate enough to be within reach. He glanced back at his charges and shouted at them. "Come on!" Lee jumped onto the coach next to Calamity, who was still firing bolts at the female ninja who couldn't seem to get close enough to do any damage. The ninja Lee had taken down seemed to also be getting to his feet. The carriage lurched forward and sped towards the gate. The guards riding in front of it swung their sabers left and right, cutting down the invaders like weeds. As they passed Kakashi, he disappeared in a shunshin and appeared hanging onto the back of the carriage. They raced off into the evening accompanied by the shouts of angry soldiers. Konoha, subjects of Konoha! The booming voice of Danzo echoed over the gathered crowd. Danzo had ensured that every citizen and soldier of Konoha was present. Many IWA ninja were there as well. Since they had been absorbed into Danzo's army, the IWA ninja had for the most part blended into Konoha society. There were a few bad ones that seemed more in tune with Danzo's trusted root soldiers. But for the most part, the citizens found that IWA ninja were no different than Konoha ninja. Just people living their lives as best they could. But today, they were gathered against their will to witness the execution of one of the nicest and most respected Konoha ninja that most of the citizens knew. Danzo leered at the massive crowd. This was what he wanted. A populace in fear of him. A demonstration of his power to cement that fear. He motioned for the guards to bring out the teacher, Irika. There was a collective gasp from the crowd when the door to the prison beneath the Hokage's tower opened to reveal Irika. His head was bloodied, his mouth tied with a scarf. Rumor had it that the Hokage, Emperor as he was now demanding to be called, had removed Irika's tongue. Those with sharp eyes in the crowd could see that it was no empty threat. It had done nothing to dampen the fire in Irika's eyes, though. He glared daggers at Danzo. One of the guards grabbed his arm and Irika pulled it away, walking ahead to his execution with his head held high. He stopped just shy of the post that he would be tied to, and that a fellow Konoha nin would soon impale him with a sword on. He looked over the crowd to see anger, disgust, pity, and fear. He hoped that no one tried anything. Irika knew that Danzo would have a lot of his root here as crowd control, and he wanted no one hurt on his behalf. He would die with the pride of a Konoha nin. A minute later, he had been tied to the post and Danzo began his rhetoric. My subjects, this is what happens to those who choose to go against the policies that I enforce. Why do you go against me? This is for the good of Konoha. For the rise of the leaf. The world needs the strength that Konoha has to guide it from the chaos. This, man, before you betray not just me, not just you, but the world itself. Humanity itself. What a load of shit! A single voice floated up from the crowd. Danzo spluttered. Who said that? Who dares? A man in a cloak jumped clear of the crowd and landed in the open courtyard between the root guarding the crowd and the root guarding the prisoner. Irika's eyes opened wide as he caught a flash of the face in the cloak. The man stood there, hidden beneath his cloak, and shouted again. Konoha has always been strong. The old man would tell us of the will of fire that is inside all of us. I don't know what your problem is, but just shut the hell up about it. Danzo furiously pointed at the man. Kill him! The figure bent over a little bit and flung the cloak off. The crowd gasped, some even screamed at the blonde-haired figure in white. Holy shit! It's the fourth Hokage! A Konoha nin exclaimed. The yellow flash! Several IWA nin shouted out fearfully. No! That's Naruto! The recognition was instant. The time away from Konoha had allowed Naruto to age and become tougher, bigger. His hair was also wilder. He was the splitting image of the fourth Hokage. And dressed all in white like he was, some were half convinced that he was the fourth, returned as an avenging angel. Naruto glared at Danzo, death in his eyes. In the name of my father, the fourth Hokage, and in honor of the old man Sarutobi III, I Naruto Uzumaki will kill you, Danzo, the worm. Naruto leapt into the air and made his sign for the shadow clone jutsu. A deafening roar and clouds of smoke filled the sky. 1,000 Naruto clones fell to the ground like raindrops. The open courtyard vanished under a sea of white. The root soldiers fell back under the assault of the sudden appearance of the army. Moving as one cohesive unit, the new Narutos pushed the root soldiers back, their sheer numbers overwhelming the guards. In the background, the assembled masses panicked, all the civilians and neutral ninja running and trying to escape the courtyard. Amidst all that, there were the few trying to escape the crowds to help the guards and attack the army of white, most planted root ninja, but a few IWA and Konoha ninja angry for blood. It wouldn't be long before Naruto's clones were attacked from all sides, but there was too much chaos and confusion to make it organized, giving the young hero a few extra minutes. A squad of 50 Narutos ran up the Hokage tower towards Danzo. With a curse, Danzo fell back into the Hokage's office and motioned for his elite root guard to protect him, while he unlocked a covering on his hidden arm. Meanwhile, the real Naruto knocked out the one guard between him and Irika-sensei. He cut the ropes binding him with a shuriken and grinned at his former teacher. Iruka stared at Naruto in disbelief. He hadn't seen his protege in so long, he had changed so much. The entire plaza was a sea of white Naruto clones. Iruka hadn't seen an attack of this magnitude since Naruto had saved him from Mizuki. It was an odd twist of fate that took them full circle. Naruto passed Iruka to 3 Naruto clones who nodded and held onto him tight. In a flash they disappeared. An observant Root-nin saw them reappear behind the crowds then disappear again in a flash. "The prisoner is escaping!" he shouted. The Konoha nin loyal to Danzo and the IWA nin had recovered from the initial shock and were pushing back against the massive crowd of Narutos. Naruto had been through a lot of training in the time he had been away though, enough for his clones to be tougher than all but the most skilled jounin of both IWA and Konoha camps. The 50 Narutos that had gone after Danzo burst into the Hokage's office like locusts. Danzo watched as his most trusted Root elite decimated them. Code-named Centipede and Lizard were a blur as hands and legs destroyed each Bunshin with a touch. Both of these Root soldiers had been personally trained by him, having shown exceptional skill in combat and a talent for chakra disruption techniques. His own personal bodyguards against the Jinchurikis of the world. Within a minute the room had been cleared. Danzo hadn't gotten to where he was without having fought many battles. This attack on his office was half-hearted at best, it was clearly a diversion. He raced back to the balcony and saw the melee in the courtyard. Hundreds of Naruto clones holding the Konoha nin at bay. Danzo signaled to Centipede, who leapt from the balcony. In midair he formed several hand signs and came screaming down to the earth. He landed with a thump on one knee and punching the ground. A massive chakra disruption wave spread outwards from his landing point. The courtyard was a sea of thunderous pops and smoke as the Kage Bunshins were destroyed. Centipede immediately passed out unconscious from the exertion. It was a near-suicide technique that Danzo only commanded he use in extreme circumstances. Anything for his leader. Danzo scanned the carnage. The prisoner was gone. He spied several Root chasing something down one of the streets. "There! That must be them! Lizard, I want them dead!" he commanded his other elite Root soldier. The assassin in question leapt from the balcony in a blur, landed in the courtyard below and raced after the other Root. Danzo knew that his orders would be carried out to the letter. His elite four did not fail, ever. He surveyed the damage. The area was mostly intact, most of the populace had run, some had stayed. It was unfortunate that Brat Naruto had claimed his heritage. It would give the Konoha nin someone to rally behind. Even if he was dead, he would be martyred and Danzo would have to deal with the stupidity of many ninja. He swore he would deal with it however he needed to. His sharp eyes caught movement from the left, and dodged just in time to avoid something being thrown at him. His instincts kept him dodging. Simban! His senses were shrieking out at him, but he couldn't see them. They must be Wind Simban, he reasoned. 3 more Naruto clones appeared running along the side of the building. One made an open fist and a Rasengan formed as they ran full tilt at Danzo. His eyes glared at the lead Naruto. So this was the real one. Foolish, he should have left with the others. This was not the first time Danzo had seen the Rasengan, but it was the first time it was directed at him. He had to admit, it was a terrifying jutsu. But Naruto was still far away, he had lots of time to counter. He prepared to do just that when Naruto disappeared in a flash and appeared inches away from Danzo, slamming the Rasengan into his chest. Danzo saw and felt that final thrust in slow motion. Was that a Harassing? Naruto felt the Rasengan connect. Felt the flesh start to tear, but then Danzo seemed to dematerialize. Danzo appeared to Naruto's left and lashed out with his sword, catching Naruto off guard, slicing his shoulder. Naruto tucked and rolled away, flashing back to the building wall, clinging to it with chakra on his feet. He clutched his shoulder and jumped away from the building. His 2 clones leapt with him. As one they shifted in mid-flight so that the real Naruto was facing the tower, while one clone was beneath him facing down, the other with his back to him, facing the other direction. This was the part of the plan that was hardest to convince Naruto to do. The Hokage's tower had long been the symbol of power within Konoha. Its significance long predated Danzo. But Shikamaru had made a valid point. It's just stone. It could be rebuilt. But pride, power. Those would take longer to recover. If Naruto's attack on Danzo failed, then this was the only option. Naruto gathered as much chakra as he could manage and pushed out in his wind attack, as hard, as much as he could. Simultaneously, the two clones did the same attack, using all the chakra they had at their disposal. It would not be nearly the amount as the original Naruto used, but enough for the purpose. Naruto's wind blast hit the Hokage's tower like a tidal wave, atomizing the stone structure into pebbles and dust where it hit. The tower had many seals on it to prevent against chakra attacks. But Naruto poured so much power into it that nothing could prevent it. It was a force of nature itself. As he did that though he was in midair with nothing to bolster him, so he should have been flung back equally. His clone behind him negated some of that backwards movement with his own wind thrust, and the one beneath him propelled Naruto upwards. The end effect was Naruto was flung backwards, but in a smoother, rising arc away from and out of Konoha, towards the general area of the meeting point. Danzo dematerialized again and reappeared seconds later on the ground as the wind finished ripping through his tower. He pulled the sleeves on his shirt up to reveal rows and rows of Sharingan eyes. 2 were now permanently closed. This technique had saved his life twice today, but cost him 2 Sharingan eyes, and those were no longer possible to replace. He swore viciously. Naruto had not managed to kill him, but he had cost Danzo dearly today. The 3 Naruto clones with Iruka kept the Hiraishin going until they were close to the meeting point, then one stayed behind while the other 2 kept going. They were being followed and the first part of the escape plan needed to be put into effect. 5 Root members burst into view, racing to catch up. Naruto's Hiraishin was able to keep them very far ahead, but the Root were skilled enough to not be too far behind. The clone pulled out a handful of exploding tags and stuck them all over his body with a grin, whistling as he did so. A minute later the Root ninja saw Naruto standing in the middle of the path. He waved at them then raced towards them. They kept heading for him, drawing weapons while doing so. Only when he was a mere 20 feet away did one of them notice the exploding tags. "It's a trap!" Root member Akbar shouted. Unable to change his forward motion in time, he shielded his face. Too late though, as Naruto crashed into them at full speed, igniting his tags. A deafening explosion rocketed the noon sky. Lizard leapt over the carnage, continuing to chase after the prisoner. He had seen the trap unfold and didn't even blink an eye at the destroyed bodies of his fellow Root. Danzo trained all such weak emotions out of them a long time ago. The 2 Naruto clones and Iruka popped into existence at the rendezvous point. The clones paused for a breather. They could Hiraishin a good bit longer, and would have to. The others appeared next to them. Chuji handed the clones some solider pills to help their strength. 2 more Naruto clones appeared with a stretcher between them. Anko lay on it, unconscious. Shikamaru nodded in approval. "Okay, now you get out of here. We will head in that direction, hopefully leading away any more following ninja." Senjai and Nagi looked at the teacher that Naruto had saved. Nagi looked away uncomfortably. Iruka's tongue had been cut out, and not gently. Senjai looked to the sky to see if the real Naruto was anywhere in sight. As if on cue, the real Naruto flew overhead. His arc would take him a few hundred yards east of their position, which was fine, that was the direction they were heading in. Senjai nodded at Nagi and they raced over to where Naruto would fall. The 2 clones grabbed Iruka again and raced off, the clones with Anko between them keeping pace. "Shikamaru," Shino said suddenly. "We have company. Strong chakra signature. Seconds away." Shikamaru had thought this was a possibility, so he put his contingency plan number 12 into place. He dove off into the bushes, while Shino did the same in the other direction. Chuji stood in the middle of the clearing waiting on the approaching ninja. Lizard landed in the clearing, noticing the fat Akamachi clan member, and glanced around quickly looking for the escapees. He felt chakra all around him and realized he had fallen into a trap. He leapt forward in a blur. Logic dictated he remove the threat in front of him first, then the threat surrounding him. He felt a movement under his feet and leapt into the air in time to avoid Shikamaru's shadow hold. The clearing was covered in leaf shadows, it would be all too easy for him to fall prey to such a jutsu here. That means the Shadow Clan user was here too. The report Danzo had on his desk claimed that there were 2 others as well. Lizard jumped and landed only on spots without shadow, racing towards Chuji who stood glaring at him. A second later his foot was arcing for Chuji's face. It collided with a satisfying thump, but instead of falling over, Chuji seemed to disintegrate before him. The figure of a man before him became a writhing mass of bugs. They latched onto his leg and he screamed as they ate into it. He simultaneously felt physical damage as well as massive chakra depletion. As he fell back, he felt his hands reach over to cover his mouth, muffling him. He realized he was held in the shadow Bainjutsu. Falling to the earth as he stared straight up, he saw the dog clan user above him, spiraling downwards. The last sound he ever heard was Kiba shouting, "Bitsuga!" Naruto twisted before he hit the ground and managed a weak wind blast. Enough to slow his fall so he wasn't liquefied on impact. He still made a rather large hump sound and a decent-sized crater. As he lay in the ground, pondering the steps he took in life to end up here, two heads peeked over into the hole. "Hey Naruto, come on, stop lazing around, we've gotta go," Senji said. "You look comfy down there, Naruto. Should we send in a pillow?" Nagi said tongue-in-cheek. "I'll put both of you in a hole and we'll see who's comfortable after," Naruto responded, clambering to his feet. He bent his knees and leapt out of the crater. Naruto looked at Iruka, who smiled at him gratefully, yet exhaustedly. Naruto walked over and threaded his arm under Iruka's, propping him up, motioning for the clone to let him go. "I've got you, sensei. We're taking you to Wave Country. I sent a message with the toads for Tsunade to meet us there. Enko needs urgent help or she'll die, and it's the fastest, safest point we can get Tsunade to meet us. Maybe she can do something about your injuries too." Iruka nodded, glancing at Enko. She looked almost dead already. Her injuries had been cleaned and bandaged by the Suna medic to the best of his abilities. He had left before their attack on Konoha, not wanting to chance Suna being tied to it in any fashion. His instructions were to keep Enko flat as much as possible, no sudden movements. Naruto's flashing Hiraishin movement was the perfect method for moving in such a case, as no actual steps needed to be taken. Senji took point. "Okay, we have one day to get to Wave Country. Let's go!" Crescent Moon Kingdom. The cave they were in was damp and dark, but it was apparently the safest place they could regroup. Kakashi was talking to the head guard who had rescued the king and subsequently the princes as well. Apparently the king had known about the pending coup d'etat, and that was the reason he had sent the princes away. Even so, they had moved months ahead of when their spies had told them it would happen. They had been taken completely off guard. The inclusion of 3 enemy ninja in the attack had also taken them by surprise. Sakura was doing her best with the king's injuries, but the ninja had done some serious damage and Sakura still had much to learn from Tsunade. His arm had petrified to stone, and it was creeping higher and higher. All Sakura could do was her best to slow it down. I don't know what to do here," she stuttered. The king looked at her kindly. "We could probably slow it down enough to get you to a proper healer on the mainland. But we need to leave immediately." "You tried, young one. I must thank you for returning my son and grandson to me safely," he said. "But I will not abandon my people." The prince looked at his father worriedly. "Forget them, Dad. We need to see about you." Calamity looked at Hiroka and back to Sakura. "It's like a poisonous snake bite, right? Keeps spreading?" Sakura nodded. Hiroka caught on to what Calamity was saying. "Ah. Well, in the Badlands, if you get bit, and have no antidote nearby, you cut off the limb. Better to be shy a hand or a leg than dead." Sakura stared at them wide-eyed. Such finality was not what she was used to. The king grabbed her hand. "They're right. Guard! Bring my sword." Prince Michiru stared at them, dumbfounded. "What? No! You won't cut off my father's arm!" "Michiru!" the king barked. The prince stood rooted to the spot, staring at his father. "You're right, they will not cut off my arm." "You will," the king said, shedding the blankets and sitting up. "What?" There was unanimous shock around the cave. "My son, you need to learn a lesson. A lesson that I never taught you. That you must suffer for the greater good. Every hero you've ever heard a story about, every great leader, every king, must at some point sacrifice. But we can leave, father. We can take our wealth and live elsewhere. We can find you better medical treatment. No! This is our land, Michiru. Our kingdom. We will not abandon it to the likes of Shabadaba. The people of our kingdom is our real wealth." The head guard placed the king's sword into the coals of their fire while this conversation was taking place. After a minute, he withdrew it, red-hot, sterilized, and handed it to Prince Michiru, who looked at it in shock. "You are not making any sense, father. Hikaru's mother. Would you let Shabadaba enslave her? Never! What length would you go through to stop that?" I'd do anything," That's what it means to be king. The king placed his stone arm on a slab table. The petrification had reached his bicep. It means that everyone, every citizen is someone we love. And we will suffer for them. He fixed Michiru in a steely gaze and commanded him. Now cut my arm off. So that I may live, and that we may fight. Michiru cried, but his grip on the sword did not weaken. He held it tightly, the seconds counting down, the silence in the room deafening. Sakura readied her cauterization jutsu, watching the steam rise off the blade of the sword. He swung, the sound of metal cutting then striking stone echoing through the chamber. The king did not so much as whimper. This is what it means to be a man, my son. To be a king. Sakura hurriedly cauterized the wound, blood initially spurting over the stone table. The flesh sizzled as the wound healed under Sakura's jutsu. Michiru ran to the wall and threw up. The king turned to Kakashi and the head guard who stared at him, with shock, awe and respect. I'm sorry, my son needs some lessons on royalty still. He's a good man, just a bit naive and sheltered. I had hoped that a year-long trip through the world would open his eyes a bit. Now then, what shall we do about this intruder in my palace? Shabadaba swore violently. The king was missing, the prince had returned early, forcing him to spring his attack sooner than planned. Their losses had been heavy too. Those damn ninja the prince had brought back were a pain in the ass. And not the good kind, he thought, glancing at his consort. He looked pointedly at the 3 ninja before him, and the head of his small army. We must find them. They will cause us no end of trouble alive still. I want this island and I will have it without interference. The ninja nodded, smiling wryly. They had each seen a ninja they could kill, and that would eliminate the threat. The money for this job would be very worth it. As they said that, a commotion was heard out in the courtyard. Before they could investigate, blurs came in through the open balcony and landed softly on the marble floor. Shabadaba stared in disbelief. There appeared 3 beautiful ninja girls and 1 ninja boy with an odd bowl haircut, who seemed to have the king on his back. The king got off and unsheathed his sword. The intruders spread out, each walking towards a specific ninja. Shabadaba. I trusted you, and you betrayed me and my people. Time to die, the king said quietly. According to the strategy they had worked out, an immediate counter-attack would be unexpected. Also, the fighters could be paired up to their advantage. Sakura would fight the ninja who was super strong, Kongu. Strength for strength. Lee would fight the girl who was fast, Karenbana. Speed for speed. From the last battle, Sakura had determined she used a mix of genjutsu and a poison attack to slow down her opponent to make herself seem even faster. The genjutsu would have a minimal effect on Lee due to his underdeveloped chakra coils, and speed-wise he could likely dodge any poison attacks. Calamity and Hiroka would take care of the ninja who could turn things to stone, Ishidate. Distance attacks versus a close combat expert. The king wanted Shabadaba and any guards for himself. Kakashi and the other loyal guards would ensure they would fight alone, tackling the small army downstairs. The prince and his son were in a building across from the palace room, commanded by the king to watch everything. The fight began with fury and shouts. The king impaled the head of Shabadaba's army on his sword. Despite only having 1 arm, the king was still a master swordsman. Shabadaba screamed in fear and anger, drawing his saber and charging the king with a flurry of wild swings. The fast girl came at Lee, using her normal mix of genjutsu and speed. But it had no effect on Lee, who followed her every movement, and he too disappeared in a blur of speed. You're not that fast, Lee said casually, catching her with a fist to her temple that glanced off. The girl crashed to the ground, but got up quickly, drawing her daggers. Lee pulled out his nunchaku, ready for her. Sakura braced herself as the large brute of a ninja rushed her. She had already made up her mind on how this fight should go. As he swung, she ducked under, then pushed as much chakra into her fist as she could. With a step, she was next to and behind her opponent. She swung as hard as she could, connecting with him, pushing the chakra through, and using her double-tap punch, the Fuji no Kiwami. The results were explosive. The ninja's stomach exploded, and his spine shattered. The outcome was horrific, and it would have a psychological effect on the other combatants she had calculated. She was right. The girl ninja had seen that mid-attack on Lee and was terrified. She threw her daggers at Lee and tried to escape, leaping for the windows. She fell back an instant later, a large arrow embedded in her chest. Michiru exhaled, lowering his bow. The bow and arrow was the preferred weapon of both himself and his son. From this vantage point, they could pick off anyone trying to escape his father's assault, and he would not let down his father. Not after what he sacrificed to do this. Hiroka and Calamity were tag-teaming Ishidate. Calamity was using her mini crossbows to good effect, keeping him at distance. Hiroka's scarf attacks were snapping and vicious, and didn't come in straight lines, making it almost impossible to dodge. Several long gashes already adorned his body. With an angry yell he rushed them, taking a few crossbow bolts to his legs, but still coming. He made it close enough to backhand Calamity, but before he could connect, Hiroka's scarf wrapped around his hand, and he found himself being raised up in the air. He began to petrify her scarf, but it wrapped itself around his neck as well. He lost focus for a split second, to reach for the scarf around his neck. He did not see the arrows that riddles his chest and neck. Hiroka dropped him like a rock, letting his body roll out of her scarf. She rolled and snapped the scarf back to her, shortening it and wrapping it around herself. Calamity grabbed a quick refill of her bows and looked around the room for other enemies. The king advanced on Shabadaba, who was also good with the saber. He was no match for the king though, who parried a wild thrust and deftly removed Shabadaba's hand. The pompous man wailed and shrieked, grasping onto the stump where his hand had been. The king looked at him in disgust. "How could a worm like you ever hope to lead a country?" "Mercy, your majesty! Please, mercy!" Shabadaba cried. The king swung his sword, lopping his head off. It rolled across the room, a look of horror frozen on its face. Mercy granted. The sounds of fighting in the courtyard grew less and less. Kakashi and the palace guards had indeed taken them completely by surprise. It was a slaughter. The king looked grimly around the room. "Not a shining day in my nation's history, but we are victorious!" 2 days later, the king sat on his throne, with the prince and his son to his left. Hikaru's new tiger friend sat next to him, purring like a kitten. The king had taken a liking to that friendship, saying it showed strength in its purest form. Michiru smiled brightly at Sakura and the others, but his eyes had a hardness that wasn't there before. Michiru had been forced to grow up, and saw the world differently now. He hoped he was indeed a good person as his father said he was. Kakashi had been unable to attend, laying in a bed exhausted from overuse of the Sharingan. "You saved my life, and my son's life. And my kingdom. We owe you a life debt that could never be repaid," the king said, his voice booming over the gathered audience. Those members of his court who had been imprisoned for not siding with Shabadaba had been released, and now cheered Sakura, and the girl team from Tengaku. Murmurs of the celestial beauties of heaven echoed throughout the hall. Lee stood there as well, blushing brightly. "The Crescent Moon Kingdom recognizes Tengaku as a friend, and as a protector of our kingdom." Such a declaration was a major coup for Naruto's fledgling village. The Crescent Moon Kingdom was rich and influential. Many other smaller nations would follow their example. The king turned to Lee. "It is my understanding that Shabadaba used Konoha ninja to try to kill my son. I realize that I owe you personally a life debt, but I hereby cut ties with your village. No member will be welcome here, nor will we send any business to Konoha. I suggest you examine your loyalties, young one, for they are with the wrong side at the moment." Lee looked down ashamedly. He had been thinking the same as well. "I thank you all. You are welcome to stay for as long as you like. We would be glad to host and celebrate you." The king smiled magnanimously. Sakura sighed, a vacation. Hiroka and Calamity grinned widely, images of that white sandy beach running through their heads.